Chapter 332. After the resistance army surged into the factory, the rebels were basically doomed. Ding Meng did not rush in with them. He knew the result when he heard the cries and screams coming from inside the building. The rebels did not even have the courage to fight back. Many of them were scared out of their wits and tried to escape. However, there was no way they could escape. The resistance army that rushed in from the back door quickly killed all the deserters. In Ding Meng's telekinesis vision, many people were trampled to death. However, he didn't have a good impression of the rebel army, so he naturally wouldn't sympathize with them. After all, they didn't even let the refugees go, so they deserved to die. Zhang Jian drove the Aurora Demon Blade and did not say much to Ding Meng. His commanding ability was quite good. The moment he entered the factory, he gave out orders on the communication channel. He instructed which teams to clear the supplies, which teams to take up positions on the rooftop, which teams to clean up the corpses, which teams to set up a defensive line. His commands were orderly. After all, now is not the time to celebrate victory. The real battle was about to begin. Ding Meng flew to the empty space on the rooftop of the turret. He could overlook the entire situation from there. The reinforcements of the rebels came faster than expected. A black line appeared on the horizon. The black line gradually thickened and turned into a black curtain. Of course, it was not a real curtain, but a huge army made up of countless soldiers, robots, and tanks in black armor. The front row of multi-purpose tanks was especially large. These tanks looked a bit like digging robots, but their four mechanical arms raised a huge black alloy explosion-proof shield. Just by looking at the thickness of the shield, one could tell that it was 3 meters thick. Obviously, it was much harder than the alloy shields used in the exchange of fire. There were more than 100 of these shields, and, on the ground, they were like a steel wall that slowly advanced towards the factory. Ding Meng noticed that the faces of the soldiers around him were pale. He could not help but ask, "What's the situation?" Zhang Jian's tone was very serious. "This is their elite unit, the Black Armor Unit." The Black Armor Unit was not the combat power of the Dawn Army. In the year that the Dawn Army was split up, the Rebel Army had gotten their hands on the equipment and equipped the Black Armor Unit. Simply put, the Black Armor Unit was made of a very hard metal material. Normal long-range weapons could not do much damage to it. This made the Black Armor Unit very powerful, and hence the name Black Armor Unit. The Black Armor troops were usually not dispatched easily. Once they were dispatched, it would be a major incident. The other main forces of the Resistance Army were basically wiped out by the Black Armor troops. Now that this force had appeared here, it was obvious that they wanted to devour the Resistance Army. Only now did Zhang Jian realize that the factory supplies were bait. The rebel soldiers stationed here were there to sacrifice themselves, to make it impossible for them to escape once they entered the factory. Otherwise, how could they have occupied the factory so easily? The black armored troops probably knew that the factory had fallen, so they simply regrouped and formed a torrent of steel to attack the factory. If the enemy's commander had any brains, he wouldn't have bombed this building, Zhang Jian said quietly. Ding Meng could understand what he meant. There is only one reason why both sides were fighting so fiercely, and that was for the supplies. Right now, a large amount of resources were stored inside the factory. If the factory was destroyed, the resources would also be gone. No one would be able to take advantage of the situation. Instead, both sides would suffer losses. The result of both sides suffering losses might not even happen. Zhang Jian's side was destined to be destroyed. Sure enough, under Ding Meng's perception, the hands of the soldiers in charge of guarding the various floors were trembling slightly as they held onto their weapons. Their faces were somewhat pale. Clearly, everyone had fought with this valiant force before and knew how powerful it was. However, in the face of such a powerful enemy, Zhang Jian quietly spoke into the comms channel. "Brothers, sisters, we are originally the Army of Dawn. When Dawn was first established, our ancestors were there to protect the people of Immortal Weaver Planet. Although we have become the Resistance Army today, Dawn's original intention is still there. If we surrender now, our wives and children will be played with and trampled on by this group of rebels. Our children will most likely be sold to the black market and sent to work as coolies. They will suffer for the rest of their lives and eventually die a tragic death. Are you willing to see such a scene? The voice that answered him shook the entire building again. No, no, no. Zhang Jian's face was filled with excitement as he roared. Well then, brothers and sisters, let us fight side by side. Even if we are burned to ashes today, we will not be traitors or cowards. The result of begging for mercy will be even more tragic. Let's go. As soon as he finished speaking, all the firing points in the building opened fire in unison. All kinds of energy bullets rained down on the rebel army's heads. Unfortunately, the seemingly ferocious firepower hit the black armored shields in the front row like raindrops falling on stone slabs. There was no damage at all. All it did was slightly slow down the movement of the tanks. On the other hand, the rebel army at the back used their energy cannons to counterattack. The entire building was riddled with holes and smoke billowed. To be honest, the rebel army's firepower was even more powerful than the resistance army's. However, they did not use shockwave bombs. Instead, they used a large-scale bombardment that would make it impossible for the rebels to raise their heads from behind the windows. Fire, Zhang Jian said fiercely. As soon as the order was given, the 4 soldiers operating the cannons immediately adjusted their muzzles and quickly rained down a net of red rain of fire. The effect of the particle laser cannons was indeed different. When they hit the shields, they exploded and a large part of the shields immediately caved in. It was just like the rebel army's attack earlier. Wherever the cannons concentrated their firepower, there would be a gap. Using this gap, the other soldiers would focus their firepower on that gap. You can't go on like this, Ding Meng said. Zhang Jian knew this very well. If he continued to fight like this, he would only be risking his life. The rebel army was less than 200 meters away from the factory. If worse comes to worst, we'll just fight it out with them. Zhang Jian had already pulled out his energy blade. Stay here and don't move. Protect the supplies. After saying this, Ding Meng jumped off the rooftop. Crystal flames spurted out from the soles of his feet and shot into the air. Ding Meng naturally became the center of attention the moment he flew out. At least 1,000 laser beams, bullets, and artillery shells were all aimed at him. This time, Ding Meng did not dare to be careless. After all, he was facing such a large army alone. He activated his defensive system and the diamond star fusing art at the same time. In the blink of an eye, he gathered all these attacks into a super light pupil that was as big as a factory. It was like a small man-made sun. Moreover, Ding Meng did not smell it this time. Instead, he threw the super large bomb at the rebel army's front row. Boom! An earth-shattering sound rang out, and a ring of blue ripples spread out in the desert. Everywhere the ripples passed, not even a blade of grass remained. Many people didn't even have the time to shout before they were vaporized. As for those war chariots, they were also sent flying and disintegrated in the air with crackling sounds. After the smoke and dust settled, a deep crater with a diameter of 50 meters appeared on the ground. The inside of the crater was pitch black. No matter what it was now a wasteland. The rebel army's morale soared. Everyone stuck their rifles out of the windows and started firing again. However, everyone had still underestimated the Black Armor unit. Although Ding Meng's destructive attack had killed over 100 people and caused the enemy's front line to be blown off their feet, the rebel army's overall formation had not been messed up. The gap quickly closed up after a few seconds, and they were still slowly pushing forward. Most importantly, the ground troops were no longer firing into the air. They were treating Ding Meng as if he did not exist. Little Rascal said in surprise, "That's not right. Could the commander of this unit have noticed it too?" She was referring to this flaw in the first prototype. Yao Manru's special armor was, in the end, more focused on defense. Its outstanding defense was built on the foundation of sacrificing its offensive capabilities. This was her point of view. The more others focused their fire on you, the more powerful you were. However, as long as they did not attack you, you were basically no threat. The commander of the black armored troops had undoubtedly thought of this point. He decisively ordered them to stop attacking Ding Meng. Most importantly, The rear of the black-armored troops was completely empty. There was no armor or command tank. Everyone was dressed in the same uniform. There was no way to find the person giving the orders. Little Rascal said, "This guy is really smart." Xiao AI sneered, "He's just a little smart. How can there be no one commanding such a large-scale attack?" Little Rascal quickly reacted. "Although you're mixed in with the normal soldiers, you're definitely talking on the internal comms channel. As long as you're giving orders, we'll be able to find you." 10 seconds later, Xiao AI decisively said, "Coordinates 10,213, A10. That's him." The first prototype immediately locked onto the target on the screen. At the center of the vast army, there was a black-armored soldier with empty hands. He wasn't holding a weapon, but was waving his hands steadily. If this person wasn't the commander, who was? Ding Meng didn't hesitate. He charged toward the ground at full speed, his body at the back and his fist at the front. This time, his fist was completely red. This was the result of Flame Energy Rushing Fist and Overlord's Mountain Crumbling Punch. The current Ding Meng was no longer the Ding Meng of Black Gold Base. When the Flame Energy Rushing Fist landed, it didn't hit the person but the ground. Boom! A large part of the ground caved in, and 20 to 30 soldiers immediately sank into it. The crater was quickly set ablaze, and these people were instantly set ablaze. At the same time, the Overlord's Mountain Crumbling Punch created a circular shockwave that spread out in all directions. Another 40 to 50 soldiers were sent flying, their limbs flailing wildly in the air. Of course, when they fell to the ground, they became corpses. Every one of them had died in a gruesome manner. Their eyes, mouths, noses, ears, and other parts of their bodies were all bleeding. They had all been shaken to death by the Overlord's Mountain Crumbling Punch. Chapter 333. As soon as Ding Meng's cannonball exploded into the enemy ranks, the rebel army could no longer remain calm. 7 or 8 soldiers pulled out their shining bayonets and surrounded him. Of course, with the strength of these beginner soldiers, they couldn't even get close to Ding Meng, let alone injure him. Ding Meng landed on the ground, stood up, and waved his palms in the opposite direction. A wave of origin energy visible to the naked eye howled out. The Holy Flame Formation released a sea of fire. This kind of pure origin energy was able to melt the nearby robots and shields into ashes, let alone humans. This time, no one dared to charge forward. Everyone was stunned by Ding Meng. Even the front row of the army stopped advancing. Taking advantage of this short pause, the commander of the black-armored troops had already opened the armor box he carried with him. In just a few seconds, he had equipped himself with a strange and terrifying armor. This was a medium-sized armor that was about 5 meters tall. It had the appearance of a flesh-eating monster. Its body was small, but its limbs were thick and long, especially its 2 arms. When they hung down, they could almost touch the ground. Its fingertips were sharp steel spikes, and its head was round and bald. Its eyes were scanning eyes, and they glowed with a demonic red light. The armor's metal exterior was suffused with a light blue luster. Even though it was a sunny day, the armor still gave off a cold feeling. Little Rascal said, "From the outside, this should be a 6th-generation flesh-eating monster armor. However, many parts of it have been modified, which is why it looks so nondescript." In fact, Ding Meng knew the basic information about this flesh-eating monster armor. It was produced by the Holy Grail Federation's Lawaka Corporation. It was a melee weapon, and because its operating system had special requirement for the soldier, it was an unpopular product on the market. It was also because it was unpopular that it was produced in very small numbers. Who would have thought that one would appear in the rebel zone? Of course, Ding Meng's focus wasn't on the armor, but on the enemy commander's explosive origin energy index after equipping the flesh-eating monster armor. It really surprised him. The screen reflected the enemy's combat strength, 788-3924. It was roughly estimated that the commander's personal strength was not below an intermediate war venerable. "Do you have any information about the enemy?" Ding Meng asked Zhang Jian. A reply quickly came through the channel. "Sorry, friend. This black-armored troop is very mysterious. Even we don't know who their commander is. You have to be careful. In the end, the battlefield was still fundamentally different from the school, the arena, and the mercenaries' territory. There was no time to waste on words. The flesh-eating monster armor suddenly jumped. This jump was fast and far, almost as if it had teleported in front of Ding Meng. Its thick and long arms swung out. Instead of calling it a fan, it was more accurate to call a grab. The steel spikes on its fingers left behind 5 dazzling afterimages in the air. This level of attack couldn't be seen clearly by bystanders. Only someone as strong as Ding Meng would be able to dodge it. Ding Meng had always carefully observed before making a move. Thus, when he retreated, the flesh-eating monster armor launched a series of attacks. A series of afterimages quickly appeared in the middle of the desert. The surrounding soldiers couldn't even be described as dazzling. They couldn't see the real bodies of the 2 suits of armor at all. They could only feel the increase in speed of the 2 suits of armor stirring up a large amount of dust in the desert. It was as if a cloud of turbid yellow sand was constantly being shot out in all directions. In the midst of the fierce battle, Ding Meng quickly understood why the flesh-eating monster armor was unpopular. First, its movement system was not the walking system of a normal humanoid suit. It completely replaced its movement by leaps and bounds. This was something that most soldiers were not used to, because humans were used to walking and running. They couldn't jump around like a kangaroo for long periods of time. Secondly, its 2 arms were actually 2 alloy blades. However, the arms seemed to be made up of many pieces of metal, so its arms could twist and change at will. It was just like the 7-star Ghost Kick, where it could attack from an unexpected angle with incredible moves. For example, right now, the opponent was clearly attacking Ding Meng with a combination of wind and ears. Just as it was about to hit his temple, its arms suddenly formed in H shape. The combination attack instantly turned into a head-on collision, forcing Ding Meng to retreat and change his move. This suit of armor was as ferocious, evil, and crazy as a real flesh-eating monster. It chased after Ding Meng and pounced on Ding Meng. It seemed like Ding Meng had no way of fighting back. At this moment, the rebel army had already stopped attacking. The resistance army was also staring at the 2 phantoms in the distance. Both sides had placed their hopes on their respective trump cards. If one of them fell first, their side would most likely be finished. Zhang Jian could only stand on the rooftop anxiously. Although he was equipped with the Aurora Demon Blade and could fly, he knew that he would definitely not be able to fly over. This was because the Aurora Demon Blade did not have Ding Meng's ability to absorb all sorts of firepower and even reflect it back. If he really dared to fly into the sky, he would have to face thousands of fierce firepower below. The commander was also a little anxious after his attack because he couldn't even land a hit on Ding Meng. On the other hand, Ding Meng was dodging his attacks with ease, as if he knew his attack pattern beforehand. The sudden change in his claws exposed an opening. Ding Meng would definitely not let go of this opportunity. Ding Meng suddenly lay down on his back to avoid the clawing attack. Then, he kicked the commander's lower abdomen. The flesh-eating monster armor did not lose its center of gravity. It twisted a few times in the air and landed steadily in the distance. Of course, this landing point had been calculated long ago. As soon as the commander's mechanical foot landed, Ding Meng's fist came whistling through the air. Bang! The punch landed squarely on the commander's chest. Even with such a powerful force, it did not send him flying. It only made him slide back more than 10 meters. In Ding Meng's mind, flame energy rushing fist felt as if he had punched an incredibly thick steel plate. This steel plate provided a lot of cushioning for the other party and protected the soldiers inside from being damaged by the impact. Xiao AI suddenly spoke up. His armor is made of 128 yuan superalloy. It's made of platinum metals, grade 1 gathered energy crystals, grade 2 red crystals, and many kinds of technological fibers. This material is very similar to the Hercules armor we fought against on Bogus Planet. According to my analysis, the similarity is as high as 85%. Ding Meng was finally surprised. A product of the Sheng Hao Corporation? Little Rascal said in a low voice, It's very likely because other armor manufacturers can't make their unique material. Ding Meng did not say anything. The opponent's armor was a product of the Luwei Corporation, but the material was made by the Sheng Hao Corporation. This rebel army really did have some tricks up their sleeves. Or perhaps Yao Manru's earlier warning was correct. Although this place looked like a riot zone, it was actually a secret game between the major corporations. However, Ding Meng was too lazy to think about this. I don't care if you're Sheng Hao or Luwei Corporation. This time, it won't be as difficult as it was on Bogus Planet. Since you're relying on your armor advantage, I won't be polite with you. With this thought in mind, countless small, shiny metal plates surrounded the prototype, forming a mixture of metal shields that floated around it. This was naturally the initial form of catoptric deflection. The commander knew that the opponent was using their equipment, but he did not care. Would this flesh eater be afraid of your metal weapons? So, he waved his arms and jumped up again. He regretted it as soon as he jumped up because the system suddenly alerted him. The interface flashed wildly with red light, and Ding Meng's combat index increased from 576, 4490 to 1550, 3390 in an instant. It had increased by almost 3 times. It was simply terrifying. However, the claws had already been extended and could not be pulled back even if he wanted to. The commander braced himself and clawed at Ding Meng's face. This time, he experienced true terror because Ding Meng stood there without moving at all. However, the moment the 2 thick arms entered the shield, it was like a wooden stick reaching into a blender. In the blink of an eye, they were pulverized by catoptric deflection. For a moment, the wasteland was filled with glittering metal fragments that flew everywhere. The flesh-eater armor's severed arms flashed wildly. The commander was shocked. He pushed off the ground and hurriedly retreated. Unfortunately, it was too late. The rotating shield state of catoptric deflection suddenly combined into a straight and sharp greatsword. The greatsword flashed, and the flesh-eater armor fell to the ground. Its legs had been cut off by the greatsword, and it could not escape. In the next second, the greatsword whizzed in a circle and returned to Ding Meng's hand. Ding Meng raised his sword and moved forward. His intention was obvious. He wanted to cut open the armor and capture the real person for interrogation. "Be careful," little rascal cried out in alarm. Ding Meng had already heard a series of beep, 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 beep warning sounds, which clearly came from the armor on the ground. Ding Meng was shocked, but he could not care less. He gathered all his strength and rushed forward, kicking the armor into the air. Boom! The flesh-eater armor turned into a ring of stars in the sky. 2 seconds later, it began to spread in all directions. Countless steel slag and fire fell like raindrops. The crowd was once again set ablaze. The rebel soldiers screamed and ran for their lives. Ding Meng sighed inwardly. The commander would rather self-destruct the armor than fall into his hands. The soldiers of the Dawn Army did not fear death. But with the death of the commander, the rebel army was in complete chaos. They were like a group of dragons without a leader and no one to command them. They were like elementary school students adjusting their formation in the school field. How could the rebel army let go of such an opportunity? Zhang Jian had already flown up from the rooftop, brandishing his twin blades as he swooped down. The other soldiers rushed out of the factory. Just like before, thousands of people shouted as they charged towards the center of the desert. At this moment, the rebel army had no intention of resisting. The tens of thousands of soldiers quickly retreated. Although the rebel army had the advantage in numbers, none of the soldiers were fools. When Ding Meng had cut off the flesh-eater armor's legs, everyone had felt the terrifying origin energy that had erupted from the prototype. It was a realm that no one had ever seen before. For such a fierce person, even if he stood there and let you punch and kick him for a few days, you might not be able to shake him in the slightest. Why didn't they run now? How long were they going to wait? Wait for death. Chapter 334. The Resistance Army's counterattack didn't last long. It ended after about half an hour. The Resistance Army had suffered a lot of casualties. There were only 3,500 of them left from the original 5,000. Their ammunition and energy had long been used up. The rebel army fled in all directions. Zhang Jian didn't chase them down. As long as he got the supplies, he would stop while he was ahead. At this moment, the resistance army was divided into several groups and began to clean up the battlefield. Boxes of supplies were also dragged out from the inside of the factory and loaded with transport vehicles. The remaining wounded received medical treatment on the spot. The other groups were naturally on alert and just needed to protect the supply convoy. Everything was coordinated in an orderly manner. It could be seen that Zhang Jian was someone who was used to being active on the battlefield. Of course, Zhang Jian had already taken off his armor. He ran to the open space and waved. "Friend, I can't thank you enough. If you need anything, just let me know. Zhang Jian, will definitely do it." Ding Ming nodded. "I've said before, half of this convoy must be driven to Bourne Hospital. I want 2/3 of the medical equipment." Zhang Jian patted his chest. "No problem. I'll deliver it to you personally." His answer was actually because he wanted to befriend Ding Ming. He had seen Ding Ming's performance just now. The black-armored, flesh-eating soldiers that the resistance army couldn't do anything to have been defeated by Ding Ming with a single sword strike. This single sword strike had directly defeated tens of thousands of rebel soldiers. Most importantly, looking through the helmet of the prototype, Ding Ming looked very young inside the armor. If you don't befriend this kind of person early, do you want to wait until he becomes a warlord or war saint? Zhang Jian was also tactful. He personally drove the trucks to the city. Zhong Ting and Zhang Qijuan from Bourne Hospital were stunned when they saw the containers being carried down one by one. How long had it been? It had only been half a day, at most, and so many supplies had been brought over with the help of the resistance army. "Ding Ming, are you okay?" Zhong Ting asked with concern. "I'm fine, Miss Zhong." Ding Ming waved his hand. "The medical cabin and energy are here. Hurry up and treat everyone." Zhang Qijuan took the initiative to come forward. He frowned and said, "Brother Ding, I'll have to trouble you to help us. A few people showed that abnormal state just now." "Oh." Ding Ming sensed a little and found a few more civilians lying on the stretchers in the corner of the hall on the first floor. These people had the same strange expression as before. Zhang Jian obviously sensed it as well. His frown deepened. "What's wrong? Has this strange disease already spread to the surface?" Ding Ming was curious. Could it be that this kind of problem only exists underground? Zhang Jian suddenly stopped talking. Looking at his tightly knitted eyebrows, Ding Ming knew that there was definitely a problem. Only he knew that this wasn't an illness, but rather a flexibility user's psychokinesis. But the problem lay here. In any case, there was a distance of 70 to 80 kilometers from the factory. In such a large area, he hadn't sensed the presence of any flexibility user. So where did these psychokinesis waves come from? How did these people get infected? Ding Ming pulled Zhang Jian to the side and whispered, "Are there people in your resistance army who have the same disease?" Zhang Jian nodded his head with a heavy expression. "Yes, but the strange thing is that even the medical cabins couldn't detect it." Ding Ming thought inwardly that it would be strange if they could detect it, because this wasn't an illness at all. Zhang Jian said, "This disease originally only existed in the underground city, but we didn't expect that it would spread to the surface. We have always kept it a secret because we were afraid of causing panic among the civilians. You should also know that after contracting this disease, the people would disappear not long after. The reason why the military sealed off Heavenly Dream City and didn't enter the Eastern District was because they were afraid of being infected." Ding Ming sighed. "Is there someone among you who is seriously ill?" Zhang Jian looked all around and made sure that no one was paying attention to him. Only then did he open his mouth and say, "Truth be told, the main reason why we took the risk to attack the rebel army's stronghold today was because there were better medical cabins in this batch of supplies. We hope that the patients can be treated." Ding Ming finally understood. There were more important people in the resistance army who had also been infected. This person's status was definitely not ordinary, but they had actually used their precious forces to snatch the supplies. Could it be that this infectious psychokinesis was produced by the radiation zone that Du Peixing and Fengshan had mentioned? Ding Ming's interest was suddenly piqued. He took the initiative to say, "This disease can't be cured by the medical cabins." "Why not?" Zhang Jian was somewhat shocked. Ding Ming said, "But I can cure it." Zhang Jian looked at him with a doubtful expression. "Really?" Ding Ming also looked at him. "That depends on whether you are willing to believe me or not." After muttering to himself for a moment, Zhang Jian replied decisively, "If Brother Ding is willing to help, can you do me the honor of taking a trip down with me?" What he was worried about was Ding Ming's status in the military. After all, the Resistance Army didn't have a good impression of the Federation's military. But today, if Ding Ming hadn't taken action, he would have been finished long ago. Looking at it from another angle, if Ding Ming really wanted to deal with him, Zhang Jian also wouldn't have any thoughts of resisting. Rather than risking his life everywhere, he might as well try another method. Ding Ming actually didn't have much interest in the Resistance Army. What he was truly curious about was the Fluxer. At the same time, he also had a strange feeling about the attitude of the military. The Holy Grail Federation had always paid particular attention to humanistic values and wouldn't usually ignore ordinary civilians. But this time it was very strange. The military seemed to be watching from the sidelines. Both the Resistance Army and the Rebel Army were hidden in the underground city. Under Zhang Jian's lead, Ding Ming smoothly entered the underground city. The underground city of Heavenly Dream City immediately reminded him of the underground command center of Meteor City. This was because it was also a spherical space with buildings in the sky and on the ground. The difference between this place and Meteor City was that the buildings here were much more backward. Many of the alloy buildings were extremely dilapidated, and the Resistance Army soldiers walking on the streets were also dressed in tattered clothes. Each and every one of them was dispirited. One could well imagine that Unit 12, who was fighting on the ground today, was probably the elite squad of the Resistance Army. Zhang Jian sighed. "AI, our supplies are becoming more and more scarce. We won't be able to hold on for much longer." Ding Ming nodded. He could now understand why the Resistance Army had to risk their lives to attack the factory. If this situation continued, it would be difficult for them to hold on for more than 2 months. After passing through several streets, the shuttle stopped in front of a 4-story building that looked like a tent. A tall man wearing ordinary clothes was waiting at the entrance of the first floor. When he saw Zhang Jian return, he took the initiative to greet him. "Thank you for your hard work today." Zhang Jian's expression was filled with concern. "Brother Zhu, have you received Deity Weave Medical Cabin number 5? The man patted his shoulder. "Everything has been transported back. You have done a good job." Only then did Zhang Jian introduce him. "Brother Zhu, this is Ding Ming. If it wasn't for him today, everyone probably wouldn't have been able to return." Only then did Brother Zhu's gaze fall on Ding Ming. While he was sizing up Ding Ming was also secretly observing him. Although this man called Brother Zhu looked ordinary, Ding Ming could sense that his origin energy was not below his own. For such a person to be on guard duty on the first floor, could this place be the core of the Resistance Army? Brother Zhu suddenly opened his mouth. His tone was somewhat cold. "Brother, are you from the military?" There was no way to hide this. The wristwatch on his wrist was enough to prove that Ding Ming was not only a soldier, but his status was also not low. Ding Ming also said faintly, "If I'm not wrong, Deity Weave Medical Cabin number 5 might not be able to cure the disease." Only then did Brother Zhu reveal an astonished expression. "Brother Ding has a way?" This question wasn't directed to Ding Ming, but to Zhang Jian, who was standing beside him. Zhang Jian nodded slightly. He had personally witnessed Ding Ming walking around in front of a few mental patients in Bourne Hospital, and they had recovered as if they had woken up. He didn't know what method Ding Ming had used, but in any case, he could cure them. Since he could cure them, then there was hope. Brother Zhu hesitated before saying, "I don't dare to make a decision on this matter. Brother Ding, please wait a moment." After saying this, he turned around and turned on his wristwatch. It was likely that he was going to ask for instructions from a higher-ranking person. Zhang Jian explained, "Brother Ding, I'm really sorry. The identity of the patients has to be kept a secret. I hope you can understand." "It's fine, I understand." Ding Ming inwardly thought that some important person in the Resistance Army had definitely been infected. Little Rascal said, "It's really strange. We are now 300 meters underground, but why can't we detect the fluctuations of fluxers? I also can't detect any such signals," Xiao AI said hesitantly. "It's very likely that the source of the fluctuations isn't a fluxer, but some other unit or medium." Ding Ming asked, "Is it that radiation zone?" Xiao AI said, "At that time, Feng Chun marked more than 80 locations on a mortal weaving planet, and the closest one to us is more than 400 kilometers away. There's at least a 45% chance that it is. It's too far." Little Rascal immediately refuted. "If the radiation in the radiation zone can spread such a long distance, then it's definitely not a zone. It's definitely a meteorite." Ding Ming clearly agreed with this point of view. There were countless celestial phenomena in the universe, and there were also mediums for psychokinesis. For example, special meteorites or planets could be attached to them for a long period of time. However, according to the current understanding of psychokinesis, psychokinesis waves were mostly produced and transmitted by the brains of living creatures. Regardless of the situation in the radiation zone, this was something that couldn't be avoided. There was definitely someone in the vicinity, and the large amount of fluctuations had caused many people to be infected. The possibility of it being a fluxer was somewhat higher. In fact, Ding Ming had a question that he hadn't asked. He felt that before they had left, Du Peixing and Feng Chun hadn't told him a lot of important information. Naturally, it was also possible that Du Peixing and Feng Chun only knew so much. Since the civilians on the ground were also infected, Ding Ming felt that it was necessary to find out what kind of damn place the radiation zone was. While the three of them were discussing, Brother Zhu quickly returned and politely gestured. "Brother Ding, Mr. Xi invites you inside." Chapter 335. Ding Ming had thought that this building was the command center of the resistance army, but after entering, he was completely surprised. After passing through the door on the first floor, he realized that this place was no longer a command center. It was a real home, a spacious living room with a sofa, a coffee table, a television, a crystal projector, and other facilities were all available. Such a home might be normal for an ordinary family in Blue Pole Star City, but in the underground city, which was located in a riot zone, it was considered a very luxurious existence. When Ding Ming entered, he saw an old man standing by the window, lost in thought. Zhang Jian had already reminded him that this was Mr. Ji Yao, a high-ranking member of the resistance army. Ji Yao was not an origin ability user, but he was a very senior military advisor in the Dawn Army. After the army split, Mr. Ji Yao stood on the side of the resistance army. "Please sit." Ji Yao turned around and waved at Ding Ming. His attitude was not polite, but it was not cold either. It was very proper, as if he was treating a guest. However, out of courtesy, Brother Zhu still poured a cup of hot tea for Ding Ming. Ding Ming knew that the immortal Weaver planet was in short supply. Even ordinary tea leaves were very rare. This cup of tea was a tribute to him for helping Zhang Jian's troops today. "Thank you." Ding Ming took the cup. Ji Yao slowly sat down on the sofa. "I heard that Brother Ding was commissioned by the military. Little Zhang said that you can treat this disease." It was obvious that he was not a long-winded person, so he simply went straight to the point. Ding Ming replied in a low voice, "That depends on the patient condition. If it's too serious, even if they can be saved, I'm afraid that there will be serious side effects." Ji Yao seemed to be worried about him. He changed his tone and asked, "Brother Ding, which medical institution in the Federation does Brother Ding work in?" "I don't have professional medical qualifications. I only know a little about medicine." Ding Ming paused and said, "I learned from Senior Shuiyin for a while. He mentioned Shuiyin to dispel the other party's doubts. After all, Shuiyin and Zhu Lixian were very famous among the older generation. As long as one was a citizen of the Federation, they would know about them." Sure enough, when he heard Shuiyin's name, Ji Yao's expression changed. His tone also became respectful. "So you're Senior Shuiyin student. I've been disrespectful, Brother Ding." Ding Ming could only reply humbly, "I wouldn't dare." Ji Yao got up and said, "Since you're from a famous teacher, then please come in." On the east side of the living room was a small corridor. At the end of the corridor was a small sealed bedroom. There was only one technological facility in the bedroom, a nutrition cabin. Other than that, nothing else. This nutrition cabin was obviously a high-end device. Its shape was a little like a dazzling gold backpack. It was a translucent cylinder that stood in the middle of the room. Its bottom was embedded into the ground and connected to an energy source. It was filled with a light green nutrient solution. The person wrapped in the nutrient solution was also an old man. However, this old man was different from Ji Yao. Although his eyes were closed, he exuded an imposing and majestic aura. He must be a person who held great power and gave orders. Ding Ming observed for a moment and then asked curiously, "Did you turn on the freezing mode and put him to sleep?" Ji Yao sighed. "Once he wakes up, he'll go crazy. Few people here can stop him when he goes crazy. We spent a lot of effort to freeze him inside." "Let me see." Ding Ming secretly circulated his origin energy. At the same time, he raised his telekinesis vision and released 50 tiny dots into the interior of the cabin. However, as soon as these tiny dots came into contact with the old man's surface muscles produced a rather strong elastic force and actually bounced the tiny dots back. This rebound even made Ding Ming's vision a little blurry. It was exactly the feeling of being punched in the face. Ding Ming couldn't help but take 2 steps back. His face was filled with shock. Old Mister is actually an origin energy expert. This was Little Rascal's analysis. Although he's sleeping, his origin energy is still circulating in his body. As long as there are any fluctuations near his body, it will trigger a spontaneous rebound. This was what surprised Ding Ming. The spontaneous rebound of his origin energy was actually so strong. He didn't dare imagine how powerful this person's origin energy would be after he woke up. Ji Yao explained, "He's a general-level origin energy expert. Brother Ding, it's best if you don't use your origin energy so easily." Brother Zhu's eyes flashed, but he didn't say anything. In fact, he was even more surprised because Ding Ming had only taken 2 steps back. This proved that Ding Ming's origin energy level wasn't low. What if Zhang Jian went up and tried? He would probably be knocked back into the living room along with the door. Moreover, he would probably fall to the ground and not be able to get up. Xiao AI suddenly said, "ACT 5570, if you want to investigate his brain, you can't use your origin energy. You won't be able to enter at all." Ding Ming frowned. "Is there any other way?" Little Rascal said, "Try using the refined essence. That's the power of the inverse source crystal. If he's really infected too deeply, his origin energy won't be able to resist the refined essence. It will be able to sense that this is a green life energy that is harmless to the body." Ding Ming thought for a moment. He took 2 steps forward and pressed his palm against the energy shield of the nutrition cabin. His palm slowly poured the refined essence into the nutrient fluid. The light green liquid gradually became brighter, as if it was an upgraded nutrient fluid. Its polymerization component had been strengthened. Brother Zhu and Zhang Jian's eyes also lit up. They were origin energy users, so they could naturally see the changes. This time, the old man's body didn't produce any rebound, and the 50 telekinesis dots were able to smoothly enter. Fortunately, this champion didn't cultivate telekinesis. If he did, Ding Ming's dots would probably have suffered a rebound. With Ding Ming's current brain development, the telekinesis dots still couldn't truly read other people's memories. He could only use Little Rascal and the other's microscopic view to make a judgment. He could see that the champion's memory neurons were like jellyfish in the microscopic world. They were connected to each other by sparkling and translucent fibers. In the end, they were integrated into a human memory. However, the champion's memory fibers had already changed in many places. Some were yellow, some were red, and some were even close to black. It was a sign that they were completely necrotic. These are the places where he was infected. The information flow inside has already been filled with other information, or it has mutated, Xiao AI explained. "You can repair it for him." Ding Ming asked in surprise. "How do I repair it?" Little Rascal said, Your universal telekinesis doesn't require you to infuse the information flow in your mind. After all, he's not an ordinary human. You can use the dots to walk along the fiber lines. It's just like constructing an origin. Once the whole thing is cleared up, it'll help him recover his memories. Ding Ming hesitated. Will that work? Little Rascal replied with certainty, yes. It's like detoxifying a poison. Right now, his memories are being taken over by poisonous information. Fortunately, it hasn't spread to his neurons. If his neurons were completely contaminated, then he'd basically be hopeless. It's also fortunate that he's a champion and has origin energy to protect his body. This has slowed down the progress of the mutation to a large extent. If he were an ordinary person, then he'd have gone completely insane. Understood. Ding Ming sucked in a deep breath. He roughly estimated that this champion needed to repair at least 8,000 fiber lines. However, this was a piece of cake for Ding Ming. No matter how difficult this task was, how could it possibly be difficult for him to repair the origin of the diamond astral technique? However, an origin energy champion's body was not to be trifled with. Repairing each and every fiber of his memory was not as easy as it seemed. Ding Ming needed to use 500 dots to sweep through the area at the same time, which was extremely taxing. In the eyes of Ji Yao and the others, Ding Ming pressed a palm against the nutrition pod and closed his eyes tightly, as if he was secretly exerting his strength. Even though the old man inside the pod hadn't changed, the nutrition pod was constantly glowing. The three of them didn't care about disturbing Ding Ming and could only wait quietly to the side. They waited for 3 hours. Zhang Jian was really getting impatient. He turned his head and whispered, "Brother Zhu, do you think he'll be able to do it?" Wang Zhu didn't answer because he wasn't sure if Ding Ming could actually cure the old man. Judging from the origin energy that Ding Ming was using, he dared to say that he had never seen anyone with such profound strength among the younger generation. As such, he was somewhat expectant. Ji Yao, on the other hand, turned his head and glanced at Zhang Jian. "Little Zhang, it's true that you're decisive on a battlefield, but being able to maintain your composure is also a great advantage." Zhang Jian immediately lowered his head and said, "I understand. Thank you for your guidance, Mr. Ji." At this moment, Ding Ming finally opened his eyes and retracted his arm. "It's done." Ji Yao was somewhat hesitant. "He's cured." Ding Ming nodded, his expression somewhat tired. "He's completely recovered. You can turn off the freezer and let him out to move around." Wang Zhu was also somewhat hesitant. His gaze was directed at Ji Yao. Ji Yao was silent for a moment. Then, he decisively ordered, "Then let old Fan out." Wang Zhu immediately understood what he meant. So many doctors and medical equipment had been helpless. In any case, they were already treating a dead horse as a living horse. It wouldn't make a difference even if they continued to struggle. As Wang Zhu operated the control panel outside the cabin, the internal freezer was turned off. The nutrient solution slowly fell to the bottom. About 10 seconds later, the old man's eyes slowly opened. It was completely different from what everyone had imagined. The old man appeared to be very awake and very calm. His eyes were filled with a kind of gentle gaze. He slowly opened his mouth and said, "Old Ji, Zhu, Xiao, Jian, have I been dormant for a long time?" Although he had been dormant, his basic perception and consciousness had not been frozen. Thus, he could vaguely guess what had happened in the outside world. Ji Yao and the other two finally revealed surprised and excited expressions. "Old Fan, you finally returned to normal. It's all thanks to Brother Ding." The protective shield of the nutrition cabin automatically opened. The old man with a bare upper body walked out in an imposing manner. It was only at this moment that the dignified aura on his body could be felt. It was awe-inspiring. Every important person had a so-called aura. The old man gave Ding Ming a feeling of pride, confidence, and steadiness. If Mr. Yu was still around, he would have such an aura at his age. The old man stared at Ding Ming for a full 10 seconds. Then he took the initiative to extend his hand. His voice was sonorous and powerful. "Fan Qingying, Dawn Army, Current Resistance Army, Steel System Origin Power General." Ding Ming was also affected by his demeanor and aura. When the old man announced his identity and rank, it was undoubtedly a straightforward way of expressing his gratitude. Chapter 336. Back in the living room, the five of them sat down on the sofa. Wang Zhu had already gotten a set of Resistance Army uniforms for Fan Chungying. It was only when she put on the military uniform that Fan Chungying's heroic aura became aggressive. However, when he faced Ding Ming, his expression was much gentler. "Brother Ding, you're really young and capable. You're so young, but your cultivation level is quite rare." Only now did Ding Ming find out that Fan Chungying was actually the deputy commander of the Dawn Army. He had joined the Dawn Army when he was 20 years old. From an ordinary soldier on duty, he had climbed up the ranks step by step to become the commander of the army. He was deeply respected and loved by everyone in the army. Fan Chungying was now 198 years old and was a mid-level Origin Energy general. At this level, he would be considered an expert on Blue Moon Planet. After the rebellion, the Dawn Army had split into 3 factions. Fan Chungying was the leader of the Resistance Army. Most of the soldiers and higher-ups were on his side. This was because the Dawn Army had always regarded protecting the residents of planet Immortal Weaver as their god. It was also because of this that they were too independent and refused to accept the Federation's establishment. Therefore, they were not on good terms with the military. Ding Ming now understood why Zhang Jian had taken such a huge risk to snatch the materials. Fan Chungying's role to the Resistance Army was as important as Silman's role to the refugee camp on planet KV-303. They were both the main star bones and the core members of the army. Ding Ming opened his mouth and said, "Elder Fan, I don't understand. Since the Dawn Army's purpose is to protect the people, why did you split up?" Fan Chungying picked up his teacup and took a sip before sighing. "This is a long story." Ding Ming lowered his head and said, "I'd like to hear the details." Fan Chungying let out a long sigh. "The leader of the Resistance Army is called Quan Jinwei. He joined the army at the same time as me. Like me, he is very respectful to his subordinates and superiors. He is very passionate and loyal. Before the army split up, he was the commander-in-chief. We have worked together for more than 160 years. I'm afraid no one knows better than me what kind of person he is." Ding Ming listened quietly. Fan Chungying continued, "Half a year before the rebellion, something was wrong with him." "Is there anything wrong?" Ding Ming asked. Fan Chungying seemed to be trying hard to remember. He was often silent and seemed to have a lot on his mind. Sometimes, when you called out to him, he would only wake up after a few calls. Ding Ming and the others understood the meaning behind his words. It was impossible for an Origin ability user to lose focus, unless that person was in extreme fatigue. At first, I thought that he had ulterior motives, but gradually he changed. He became irritable and easily angered. He would yell and beat people up for no reason. You should know that he never scolded his subordinates, let alone beat them up. Fan Chungying showed a puzzled expression. When he was at his worst, he often talked to himself in the room alone. Sometimes he smirked, sometimes he was silent. Sometimes you looked into his eyes and felt that they were empty and confused. "Brother Ding, since you are a doctor, you should know what's wrong with him." Ding Ming understood. That Quan Jinwei must have been infected as well, because these symptoms had slowly turned from mild to severe. Fan Chungying continued. During that time, he was not the only one who had this abnormal mental state. Many of our brothers had the same problem. The worst thing was that these people had mysteriously disappeared. Ding Ming asked, "Did you find out the reason?" Fan Chungying sighed. "Actually, a few years ago, the Immortal Weaver star showed signs of abnormalities. If I remember correctly, it should be 3 years ago. Our patrol team ran into an energy exploration team from the Sacred Splendor system." Zhang Jian frowned. "Energy exploration team?" Ding Ming could understand his doubts. A habitable planet like the Immortal Weaver star had been repeatedly studied and verified by various experts on the Federation's fleet before it was developed. Was it suitable for habitation? To put it simply, how this planet was to be developed and used had been planned in advance. If you wanted to do energy exploration, You should go to an unfamiliar planet in outer space. Fan Chungying explained. At that time, old Quan and I didn't pay much attention to it. This team didn't have any armed personnel, and they were all ordinary humans. Furthermore, they were in the outskirts, so they wouldn't affect Heavenly Dream City. However, after a few months, this team mysteriously disappeared. We sent many people to look for them, but they couldn't find them. Ding Ming asked, "What's the identity of this team?" Fan Qingying said, "They're from a company called Flower Language, but the investment company behind the exploration is Tianheng International." Tianheng International was the third largest business group in the Holy Grail Federation, second only to Shenghao and Xinhong. Tianheng International's main business was manufacturing, especially the research and development of various mechanical technologies. It was the most powerful company in the Holy Grail Federation. At the same time, Tianheng International had a considerable amount of authority in the entertainment industry. It could be said that they were the biggest company, and the celebrities under them were the most dazzling existences in the entertainment industry. This cannot be helped. For example, the new models of battle armor, new aircraft, and spaceships. These things were endorsed by various big stars as soon as they hit the market, and their sales were surprisingly good. However, energy exploration was not Tianheng International's area of expertise. In this aspect, Xinhong International was the leader. Therefore, this Tianheng International's exploration team did not smell right. There might be another explanation for it. Fan Qingying continued. Actually, after our search, Tianheng International also sent a search team. However, after more than a month of searching, they still did not find anything. After that, they withdrew. Did they abandon their own people? Ding Meng did not understand. Fan Qingying said, "I don't know the reason, but I'm guessing that they couldn't do anything about it even if they wanted to." Ding Ming thought to himself that the radiation zone might have been created by Tianheng International. Sure enough, Fan Qingying continued. After Tianheng's people withdrew, our people did not give up and are still searching for them. Ding Ming asked in a low voice, "Then, did you find them?" "We still haven't found them, but we did find something very unusual." Fan Qingying answered as she turned on the screen on her wrist device. The screen switched to a series of images, all of them showing the desert outside Heavenly Dream City. The desert was originally made up of fine sand and gravel, but when the screen zoomed in, one would find that many of the ground were stained with some strange substance. It looked like black paint, but it also looked like traces left behind by flames. Ding Ming asked, "What is this?" Fan Qingying shook her head and said, "We don't know either. However, this is the location where the exploration team was active during the past few months. The coordinates of these substances perfectly match their route." After that, a riot broke out in the refugee camp on Planet Thorn. After that, the entire Federation knew about the death of Dragon Horse Media's reporter. Thus, the Sacred Alliance jumped out. It was also at that time that Old Quan and I had different opinions. I thought that it would be enough to protect Heavenly Dream City, but he wanted Dawn to join the Sacred Alliance. Ding Ming nodded. It was probably at that time that the Dawn army was completely divided. Fan Qingying suddenly stood up and paced back and forth in the room with a teacup in her hand. "Brother Ding, since you're a member of the military and can enter the riot zone, I believe that you should know some inside information, right?" Ding Ming hesitated and said, "Are you referring to the radiation zone?" Fan Qingying asked in return, "The military defines these places as radiation zones?" Ding Ming nodded and said yes. Fan Qingying said, "It doesn't matter what they're called. The key is that they do exist. Furthermore, according to my secret observations, these coordinates are the exploration team's route. They're no longer on the surface, but underground. There are no longer any traces of them on the surface, and the traces have been converted into random underground locations." He paused for a moment, then finally said something shocking. "Quan Jinwei goes in every once in a while, and there's a pattern to this. On average, he goes in every 10 days or so. However, every time he goes in, a large number of people will disappear, and the riots on the surface will become more frequent." Ding Ming hesitated and said, "Elder Fan, are you saying that this disease, these disappearances, and the riots are caused by your old partner?" Fan Chungying waved her hand. I don't have any evidence. It's just a simple suspicion. After all, the timing is too coincidental. Of course, from my personal point of view, I don't want these things to be caused by him. Ding Ming understood. So you followed him alone? Fan Xingying's expression was a little ugly. I also contracted this strange disease after I came back. If it weren't for you, Brother Ding, I would still be in the nourishment chamber. Ding Ming sighed. This is not a disease. He knew that these people were going to ask why, but things like infectious telekinesis were not something that could be explained in a few words. Thus, he changed his tone and said, I came to the immortal Weaver planet specifically to investigate this matter. Fan Xingying was silent. Then, she said, if Brother Ding insists on going, I can go with you. Ji Yao and the others were shocked. Elder Fan, you've just recovered. It's best if you rest for a while. We can't do without you. I know. Fan Chungying sighed. I have a feeling that our biggest enemy is not the rebels, but the radiation zone. I'm afraid that the riots in Linda's faction were caused by them. Ding Ming pondered and said, Elder Fan, since you've been to that place, can you describe it to me? What kind of people are they? Fan Xingying couldn't help but look at him. I can't describe it to you because I can't. As long as you enter that place, all signals will disappear. You'll only understand if you go there yourself. Ding Ming said, then, when do we leave? Fan Xingying said, Brother Ding, whenever you want to leave. Chapter 337. There were a total of 86 radiation zones on the immortal weaving star, and the one that Fan Xingying had chosen was exactly what Xiao AI had predicted. There was at least a 45% chance that this place was closest to Heavenly Dream City. It was located 465 kilometers northwest of the city. Fan Xingying did not bring his subordinates with him. His idea was that if he was infected again, at least he would not infect more people. It was true that the Resistance Army needed him, but the Resistance Army needed Wang Zhu and Zhang Jian more. Therefore, only he and Ding Ming were sent to investigate this time. In order to avoid alerting the rebels, Fan Chungying and Ding Ming even chose to travel on foot. They only arrived at the so-called radiation zone 30 hours later. It was already nighttime, and under the dark night, there was a vast expanse of ruins. The ground was covered with molten yellow rocks, and the air temperature reached 75 degrees. Normal humans would not be able to stay here for a long time. However, Ding Ming's heart sank. He had seen this before. Was this the last map of the Starlight exam? Dark Night Abyss? There was a strangely shaped castle in the center of the map. It looked like a tortoise shell embedded in the ground, and brown liquid would occasionally spurt out from the cracks in the ground. This was almost exactly the same as Dark Night Abyss. It was a completely realistic version. It could be said that this map had been transplanted from Dark Night Abyss. Little Rascal suddenly said, I understand now. The quantum detectors in space scanned the terrain here based on the radar's blind spots, but because the signal was blocked, they didn't know the specific situation below. That's why they deliberately created a map to test you. Little Rascal's analysis was undoubtedly very reasonable. Ding Ming now understood why the final stage of the examination had ended so abruptly. It was because everything below the ancient castle might not be as Feng Chun had predicted, so he had designed a strange shadow tree in advance. Fan Chungying led the way alone. Brother Ding, do you know about the Devouring War? Ding Ming followed closely behind. Elder Fan, are you referring to the war 80 years ago? 80 years ago, Fan Chungying was 100 years old. From a perspective of an origin ability user, she was at the prime of her life. Sure enough, Fan Chungying's tone was somewhat emotional. At that time, Linda's faction was the rear of the Federation and had not yet fallen. However, our Dawn Army also volunteered to fight against the invasion of the Devouring World, so I have some understanding of the Devouring World. Ding Ming was able to participate in the war against the Devouring Realm and survive until now, which meant that he knew a lot about it. Therefore, Ding Ming said, Elder Fan, please give me some pointers. Fan Chungying nodded and stopped. He pulled out a sharp military knife from the side of his leg, then squatted down and used the military knife to pry open a piece of rock slag on the ground. Finally, he picked up a little grayish-brown powder. "Brother Ding, can you recognize what this is?" Ding Ming also squatted down and carefully observed the small pinch of powder. Actually, he wasn't the one observing. It was mainly Little Rascal and the others analyzing its composition. After a while, Ding Ming showed a serious expression. "Poison." Fan Chungying nodded. "Brother, you have a good eye. This is indeed the poison of the devouring world." Ding Ming hesitated and said, "As far as I know, the poison of the devouring world shouldn't appear here. At least, it shouldn't appear in Linda's faction." His statement was also based on Linda's position. Although the Holy Grail Federation was adjacent to the devouring world, there was still the buffer zone of the Zyrtl star field between them. Linda's faction, on the other hand, was located at the rear of the Federation. This place was at least 10 light years away from the devouring world. How could the poison of the devouring world appear here? Fan Qingying said, "We've also ruled out the possibility of human factors because there aren't many mutation-type doctors in this place, let alone mutation-type doctors." Ding Ming also understood this logic. The so-called human factor was that poison experts like Meng Yin had released the poison. However, this place was full of poison. If there were really so many poisons, how could experts waste them on such a large area? One had to know that the poison of the devouring world was an extremely precious material in the eyes of experts like Meng Yin. Fan Chungying continued, "There's another problem. The devouring world must exist in a low-temperature and humid environment, but this is a high-temperature environment. The water in the poison has completely evaporated and turned into crystal powder." Ding Ming frowned and said, "Elder Fan, what do you mean?" Fan Chungying nodded. "I think it's the work of an expert. There was nothing wrong with this analysis. At the very least, it was done by a thermodynamic expert." However, Ding Ming felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint what it was. "Let's go in," Fan Chungying suggested. The interior of the castle was completely different from Dark Knight Abyss. There was only one passageway here, spiraling downwards in a spiral shape. The passageway was extremely narrow, allowing only one person to pass through at a time. Furthermore, the passageway was neither dark nor damp, nor eerie. The interior of the passageway was extremely dry, filled with rock walls and sand. Little Rascal analyzed. "It seems that Feng Chen's hypothesis isn't correct," Xiao AI said, "but the surroundings are also filled with poison, which greatly weakens the detection of signals from the outside world." It was normal for Fan Qingying and Ding Ming to be able to sneak in because the two of them were not afraid of poison. Fan Qingying was a champion, so normal poisons were useless against her. Meanwhile, Ding Ming had the cave virus, so almost all poisons were ineffective against him. Ding Ming observed the walls as he walked. These passages seemed to have been dug out by someone, and they didn't use any tools. His tone suddenly became surprised. They were actually dug out with their bare hands. Fan Chungying praised, "Brother, you have a good eye. I think you must have spent a lot of time in the underground mines." Ding Ming smiled bitterly. "There was a time when I did this on the exile planet." Fan Chungying did not ask about his experience. Instead, she asked in return, "In your opinion, why didn't they use any tools and insisted on digging with their bare hands?" Ding Ming smiled even more bitterly. "I really can't imagine it." Fan Chungying continued, "A year ago, these passages didn't exist. They were all created gradually. In other words, they were slowly dug out by someone." Ding Ming asked curiously, "Who were the people who dug them out?" Fan Chungying also smiled bitterly. "I'm also curious about that, but the problem is that I've never discovered the people who dug them out. Of course, during the time I was frozen, the changes in the situation here far exceeded my initial understanding." When he said that, Ding Ming felt the temperature around them suddenly drop. Furthermore, the passage finally branched off. This branching was very strange. First, Ding Ming and Little Rascal arrived at a relatively large cave. The cave's floor was very flat, but it was already a little damp. There were traces of poison in the air, and there were at least 15 entrances all around the cave. If they entered any of the 15 entrances, they would arrive at a slightly wider passage. However, After walking for a while, they would arrive at the same cave again. It was still the same as before as they continued to walk down. However, the passage's width kept increasing, the temperature kept dropping, and the poisonous gas kept getting denser. After passing through 7 or 8 caves, a very dense light green liquid indeed appeared on ground. This place was indeed the border of the Devourer's world. It was exactly as Ding Meng had guessed in Dark Night Abyss. The wrist device's signal was already very weak, but his telekinetic vision was not affected at all. Ding Meng's telekinetic wave could detect a distance of 500 meters below the ground. It's the Devourer's world. Ding Meng's tone was no longer doubtful this time. He was completely certain. Fan Chungying also stopped in her tracks. I was infected at this level. Oh, Ding Meng was even more curious. Even with his warrior-level foundation, he was not affected by the poisonous gas around him. It was really incredible that he was attacked by telekinesis instead. But Mr. Fan, I can't feel any telekinetic fluctuations now. As soon as he said that, his and Fan Chungying's expressions changed at the same time. The two of them also held their breaths in tacit understanding, stopped circulating their origin energy, and quietly sneaked into the nearest passage. 10 minutes later, people indeed came from another passage in the cave. There were quite a lot of people, a total of 12 of them. Each of them was equipped with light, small armor. 5 or 6 of them were even carrying various guns and equipment. It was obvious that this was a reconnaissance team. This team seemed to have noticed the change in the terrain and did not advance further. Instead, they rested on the spot. This group of people rested very interestingly. They actually took out folding chairs and folding beds from their space backpacks. Then, everyone sat or lay down to rest. They even took out drinks and canned food to eat and drink. Ding Meng also looked at this group of people with great interest, especially the men and women who were eating and drinking. They took off their masks and were not afraid of the poison in the air, nor did they care about this muddy environment. They ate and drank with relish. Fan Qingying was also very calm. She kept watching and did not make any movements. It was not difficult to discover this place, but to be able to find this place, they must have some tricks up their sleeves. Ding Meng turned his head and glanced at her. The meaning in his eyes was obvious. Are they from the rebel army? Fan Qingying shook her head slightly. Ding Meng was curious. If they were not from the rebel army or the resistance army, where did this group of people come from? Halfway through their meal, the 12 people suddenly stood up as if they were possessed. After a moment of panic, all of them were fully armed again. There was no need to guess what was going on. It must be someone from the top. Sure enough, another team rushed in from another hole. This new group only consisted of 8 people. They were also equipped with small armors. The armors looked a little shabby, but this group of people did not carry any weapons. After they came in, they were startled for a moment. Then, the leader of the team said in a droning voice, "Let's go." You're in such a good mood. You can actually eat in this fecal environment, and it's canned beef with soy sauce. Not bad. This sarcastic remark was self-evident. Someone from the reconnaissance team immediately scolded. It's none of your business. You poor bastards don't even have anything to eat. I guess you can only eat *T. The man was not angry. Instead, he sneered and said, "Hey, you can't win, so you're talking nonsense? Lao Sha, don't you care about your men?" Ding Meng and Fan Chungying looked at each other. Do these two groups of people know each other? Fan Chungying also gave them a look. Ding Meng also shook his head slightly. These people are definitely not from the military. Chapter 338. The man called Old Sand was probably the leader of the scouting team. He did not say much and tossed a can to the man. Night Owl, try it. It's not bad. The man called Night Owl took the can and looked at the exquisite packaging. He said thoughtfully, "Old Sand, let's not beat around the bush. How much can you earn from this?" Old Sand sat back down on the folding chair and said calmly, "Just asking about this? Do you want to break the rules?" Night Owl sneered. "I'm the one breaking the rules?" Old Sand's tone turned cold. "How could you find this place if you didn't secretly follow me?" Night Owl said disdainfully, Why would I need to secretly follow you? The smell of the poisonous gas is the strongest in this area. Is it that hard for me to find this place? At the very least, I don't need to use a detector. Old Sand snorted and did not say anything else. He sat down and closed his eyes to rest. Little Rascal suddenly said, "These two groups of people, could they be the Glove Corps?" Ding Meng nodded. "I think it's most likely. The so-called Glove Army was not a real army, but a bounty hunter in the Confederation. They were different from the hunters and mercenaries from outer space like Green Arrow, Sirius, and Extreme Robber. Outer space forces took on missions just to make a living, but the bounty hunters in the Confederation did not have to worry about food and clothing. The missions they took were usually very big and difficult, and these missions were often issued by large corporations or big families. The reason was simple. There were many things that could not be seen in public, and they needed someone to do the dirty work. Dirty work was a bit of a bad name, so they called themselves the White Gloves. It was a fitting image. They specialized in making money. Since there were more white gloves in the Federation, they formed various organizations and were collectively called the Glove Corps. Although there was a big difference between the White Gloves and mercenaries, there were similarities. Every White Gloves had their own style and principles. At the very least, there were no evil forces like the extreme bandits in the Federation. If they really turned into such an organization, they would be digging their own grave. Of course, the White Gloves was not a friendly organization that was easy to reason with. It was still the same principle. Interests were above everything else. If there was no conflict of interest, everyone was easy to talk to. Once there was a conflict of interest, everyone would talk with their fists. Whoever had the bigger fist would be the reason. Based on the current situation, these two groups of people should be White Gloves. Although they knew each other, they didn't like each other. Ding Meng wondered what kind of shameful things were hidden in the radiation zone that attracted two groups of White Gloves at once. He decided to use the old method, wait and see. If he had such thoughts, how could Lao Sha and Night Owl not have the same thoughts? This was especially true for Night Owl. He had searched for a long time before he was able to determine the coordinates of this location. However, if he were to wait and see, the other party would sit, lie, and eat while his men could only stand and stare. No matter if you were an ordinary human or an origin energy user, if you stood still for a long time, you would feel all kinds of irritation. Thus, Night Owl only stood for a few minutes before he said with a dark expression, "Abe Xiao Yao, Scholar, Tortoise, everyone, get to work." These people were definitely not using their real names, but code names. Moreover, as soon as he gave the order, everyone spontaneously looked for a cave entrance and went down, including Night Owl himself. Once this group of people dispersed, Lao Sha and the others could not sit still. Lao Sha also ordered in a low voice, "Everyone, put away your things. Double the frequency of the instruments. We will proceed according to plan. We can't let them find it first." In less than 3 minutes, this group of people also began to move down. However, they were different from Night Owl. Lao Sha and the others moved together. No one went alone. It was not until the two groups had completely left that fan, Cheng Ying slowly said, "I've heard of this Night Owl before." "Oh." Ding Meng was surprised. Someone who could make an origin energy general remember him was definitely not some weakling. Sure enough, Fan Cheng Ying nodded with a cold expression. There's a ranking on the darknet for the efficiency of bounty hunters. If I remember correctly, this Night Owl should be ranked 7th. The missions that this person takes are all very difficult. Apparently, he rarely fails, and his strength is not below that of a beginner combat master. Ding Meng had already pulled up the Darknet's name list on his wristwatch. Because the signal was weak, the subtitles on the list were a bit blurry, but the basic information was still clear. Number 7, Night Owl. Mission acceptance rate, 11%. Completion rate, 98%. Credit rating, excellent. Overall assessment, 75%. Actually, just from a mission acceptance rate alone, it was enough to show that this Night Owl really did not accept normal missions. The astonishing completion rate of 98% also showed that he was an expert in this field. Fan Cheng Ying said, "Should we go down and take a look?" Ding Ming's choice was definitely not to follow behind this group of people. After all, he had spread out psychic micro-dots to scout the way, and he knew the whereabouts of these people like the back of his hand. However, the strange thing was that as they continued to go down, the expected psychic waves did not appear at all. Instead, with every level they went down, the traces of the devouring world became more and more obvious. First of all, the wristwatch's signal had dropped from 100% to 22%. This signal strength was no longer enough to support the holographic projection. Once it dropped below 20%, it could only transmit simple text messages. If it dropped below 10%, it would basically lose contact with the military. Now, every cave could no longer be called a cave. The ground was full of very thick filth, and a mixture similar to pus flowed on the walls. The air had completely turned into a mist-like poisonous gas, completely filling every cave. Instead of calling it a cave, it was better to call it the bloody mouth of a monster. If this was not the devouring world, then where could it be? How many years has it been since I saw this place again? Fan Qingying looked at everything in front of her and murmured with a sigh. Ding Ming said, "Elder Fan, but the terrain of the devouring world this time has appeared inside the Federation." Fan Qingying explained, "Under normal circumstances, there are several possibilities. Let's talk about the most common one first, which is that a devouring world creature hatched underground. This was undoubtedly the most likely possibility, but there were too many conditions to be met. A devouring world creature would have a hard time surviving in the Federation because it needed poison to reach a high level of pollution. The more space it polluted, the more resources it could absorb. Only by absorbing enough would it have a chance of survival. Otherwise, a larva would die after being exposed to the sun for a few hours. The problem was that this was the immortal Weaver planet of the Linda system. Did they really think that the International Space Station on the periphery was useless? The Holy Grail Federation had always strictly guarded the devouring world. Let alone a larva. Even a mosquito would not be able to enter the Federation. Fan Qingying continued to explain, but this time her tone was very serious. There's another possibility. The devouring world creature should have been installed in a container when it was still an egg. Then, it blocked all kinds of signal detection and passed the security check. It hid underground for a long time, and when the time was right, it would naturally hatch. This was the human factor, but as long as it was a normal human, they would not do something so stupid. Ding Ming thought about it and said, "Are there any other possibilities?" "There are." Fan Qingying hesitated, but she still shook her head. "But that situation is not very likely." Ding Ming definitely did not know what kind of situation it was, but Little Rascal knew. Little Rascal was already speaking. "There's another possibility, which is a wormhole." Ding Ming was no stranger to wormholes. To put it simply, it was a four-dimensional space, which could also be understood as a spatial rift. The Federation understood it as a wormhole, and the devouring world defined it as a teleportation portal. With the current level of technology of the Holy Grail Federation, it was possible to artificially create a wormhole, but this required the use of a very powerful spatial array transmitter, which consumed a lot of energy, and the teleportation distance was not too far. Ding Ming even knew that Mr. Cuddle's curved mirror technology was in this general direction. To be precise, it was interstellar travel, teleporting people or objects to different space-time, but that was a much more advanced level. Although the method of creating a wormhole for the devouring world's teleportation portal was completely different from the method used by the Federation, there was one thing that could not be avoided, and that was that you had to gather an enormous amount of resources. But here was the problem. If the devouring world really did create such a large formation, the Federation's fleet would have been alerted long ago. How could they not have discovered it? Xiao AI also spoke up. There's another problem that you have to pay attention to. Judging from the current level of pollution, if this was really created by a devouring world monster, then this monster's level is not low. The devouring world monsters were the same as the Federal Empire's origin ability users. They were all certified to have different levels. The devouring world monsters were divided into Soldier, Warrior, Fierce Warrior. The first 3 levels were enough to make any human origin ability users below the advanced warrior level suffer. Following them were Commander, Devil General, Devil Spectre, Elder, Great Elder, Sect Master, Queen. A Devouring World Elder was enough to rival an origin ability warrior. The Federation's highest level Devouring World monster was the Queen. It was like a mother. As long as it did not die, it would give birth to countless Commander, Devil General, and Elder. It was like a nest, forever nourishing an endless number of monsters. Xiao AI said, "The strangest thing is why the signal here has been reduced to such a degree. This is definitely not the Devouring World monster's nest." This was what Ding Meng was most concerned about. Even the quantum detectors above could not penetrate this place. But his telekinesis vision was not affected at all. Telekinesis vision was also a wave signal, but it was unimpeded. This was completely illogical. Ding Meng suddenly sat down in the quagmire. "Let's just wait here." Fan Chengying was stunned. "Wait." Ding Meng's expression was resolute. "We won't be able to find any clues, even if we run around aimlessly like this. It's better to wait patiently." Fan Chengying understood what he meant. Based on the current situation, the underground cavern was much larger than they had imagined. It was better to let the 2 groups of white gloves scout the way. They were more professional at finding things than the 2 of them. Chapter 339. What Ding Meng and Fan Chengying were waiting for was to sit on the ground and start cultivating. After all, Fan Chengying was a body-hardening warlord and had a lot of origin energy. Although she was sitting still, she was actually circulating her origin energy slightly to resist the toxins in the surroundings. This was equivalent to tempering her body. Meanwhile, Ding Meng closed his eyes and rested. He secretly entered the space of consciousness to study the lone dance of the serene lotus. After an unknown amount of time, the 2 of them opened their eyes at the same time and looked at a cave entrance in the north. Obviously, they had been alerted by the commotion. They could see that the walls of the cave were trembling slightly, as if someone was drilling a hole in the distance. Not long after, the trembling intensified, and the entire cave started shaking violently. Ding Meng and Fan Chengying had already retreated far away. They could sense a large group of people surging up from above. The first person had fallen down from the cave entrance and landed in the filthy quagmire with a plop. Then, the people behind him were poured in like dumplings. One by one, they rushed to the other cave entrances as if they were fighting for food. Ding Meng was very calm. These are all ordinary civilians. Fan Chengying's expression was very ugly. Not only that, but there are also members of the rebel army and our people. Ding Meng said in surprise, "Are you saying these are the patients who disappeared for no reason?" Fan Chengying said, "I've been looking for these people all this time. I didn't expect them to actually come down here." Ding Meng took a closer look and found that Fan Chengying's judgment was not wrong. These people had a common characteristic, which was the expression of the mental patients from Bourne Hospital. Some of them had blank expressions, some looked frightened, some were scared, and some were laughing happily. These were all abnormal. But now, these people were showing new changes. Their eyes were excited and fanatical, as if they had entered a treasure trove and were crazily rushing to the depths of the treasure trove. Moreover, there were quite a lot of people rushing in. Ding Meng did a quick calculation and estimated that this dumpling team had at least 500 people, all of whom were rushing to the next level. "Let's go." Ding Meng and Fan Chengying reached a tacit agreement at the same time. In the beginning, Ding Meng did not take these people seriously. However, as they went deeper and deeper, Ding Meng was secretly surprised. These people were moving faster and faster, and they were going deeper and deeper. Fan Chengying said in a deep voice, "Brother, the current concentration of the poison gas has already reached the level that only a high-level war elder can resist. If you feel uncomfortable, we will return the way we came." Ding Meng replied, "Old man Fan, I'm fine. Let's keep following." Little Rascal said in a low voice, "Ding Meng, although these people still have the characteristics of life forms, they are no longer human. Xiao AI said, "They have already been assimilated." Ding Meng also saw that although these people still looked human and their hearts were still beating, their skin, organs, and blood had all mutated. These were the same characteristics he saw on Xiao Wei and the others on Planet V4. They must have been completely corroded by the poisonous water of the quagmire on their way here, which was why even their running speed was so fast. Finally, after they ran down 17 levels, the already cold temperature suddenly rose. A wave of heat surged in their faces, and this wave of heat was mixed with an indescribable stench. The cavern in front of them was different from the ones above. The walls and ceiling of this cavern were made of ordinary sand and stone, which was not contaminated by the poison. However, the ground directly below them was a huge pool of blood. The reason it was called a pool of blood was because the liquid in the pool looked a little like blood. It was reddish-black in color, and it was very thick. Steam kept rising from it. Little Rascal immediately reported, "Harmful substance detected. Although it is not a threat to you, Ding Meng, it is at least 25 times more toxic than the ones in the caves above." Ding Meng also noticed that Lao Sha and Night Owl were fully equipped with individual armors. Every one of them had an alloy mask on their faces, and there was not a single gap between them. Every one of them had a suspension device attached to their waists, and a thin, shiny steel wire hung down from the ceiling to suspend them in midair. These people could clearly tell that the pool below them was a dangerous place. They were very nervous as they hung in the air, and all of their weapons had their safety pins removed. They did not dare to come down, but the dumpling team did not hesitate to rush down. These people went crazy as soon as they came into contact with the reddish-black liquid. Some were dancing, some were rolling on the ground, and some were even running. These people finally arrived at their destination and seemed to be celebrating their victory. There were even people who were lying in the pool and gulping down the poisonous liquid as if they were eating the most delicious meal in the world. This scene was both strange and disgusting. Finally, someone above could not take it anymore. He took off his mask and vomited. "Put it back on," Lao Sha shouted. Unfortunately, it was too late. The moment the mask was taken off, the poisonous gas instantly entered the armor. The person inside felt like he was being strangled by the neck. His throat made cracking sounds, and his face changed at a speed visible to the naked eye. His skin withered and turned green, his eyeballs protruded, and his facial features spontaneously folded towards the center. The intensity of the poison was enough to make one tremble with fear. Lao Sha closed his eyes in pain. "Forget it. Let him go." Someone beside him hesitated. "Big brother, he will definitely die if he goes down." Lao Sha roared, "Let him go. If he mutates, we will all be in trouble." The person beside him was silent for 2 seconds. Then he clenched his teeth and waved his hand. A cold light flashed across the sky, and the steel wire around the poisoned person's waist was cut. The person fell straight into the pool. Just as he was about to fall into the poisonous liquid, an unbelievable scene happened. The poisoned person suddenly stopped in the air, as if a pair of invisible hands were holding him. Ding Meng waved his hand again, and the poisoned person miraculously floated slowly from the top of the pool to the entrance. This was not because Ding Meng was being kind, but because he could not bear to see this person turn into a monster. After all, they were all humans, and the key was that he had the ability to save people. The poisoned person was pulled to his side. Ding Meng pressed his palm hard on his face, and a few drops of blood immediately seeped in. In front of the K-virus, any poison was a piece of cake. The poisoned person also recovered at a speed visible to the naked eye. In less than 20 seconds, the poisoned person's true appearance was revealed. It was actually the face of a woman with delicate features. The woman looked very young and probably did not have a high level. She could not withstand the poisonous gas at all. Ding Meng checked again and could not help but exclaim in surprise, "You're really brave. A normal person actually dares to come down here." The woman returned to normal. When she saw the strange man in front of her, she almost cried. "Thank you, big brother, for saving me." Fan Chengying watched all this in silence. One could imagine how shocked he was. He was a veteran who had participated in the Devouring World War and knew very well how terrifying the Devouring World War's poison was. It was normal for Ding Meng to be fine after coming into contact with the poison with his bare hands. However, he could also detoxify the poison in an instant. Anyway, he had never seen such a person before, and probably would never see one again. Fan Xingying, a warlord, was already so surprised. The dozen people hanging above were already dumbfounded. In fact, everyone had also noticed the two strangers coming in from the entrance. One of them was already amazing enough without wearing armor, and the other could even detoxify the poison. Damn, who was this person? There was no such person among the white gloves. Lao Sha's voice came from above. Friend, thank you for your help. I, Lao Sha, have a good reputation. If you don't believe me, you can check the efficiency rankings. As he spoke, he threw down his weapon, which was also a way to express his goodwill. Ding Meng caught it and sensed it slightly. He found that this big gun was actually a modified one. The muzzle was a 12-leaf rotating wheel with 12 energy crystal balls embedded in it. This meant that not only was this gun powerful, but it could also provide continuous firepower. It might not be a high-end gun, but it had a large capacity and was durable. It was very practical to deal with the Devouring World War's monsters. This proved that Lao Sha had made sufficient preparations beforehand. However, this gun was nothing compared to the God Slayer ion pulse gun in his backpack. Therefore, when he looked at Fan Xingying, who was empty-handed, Ding Meng could not help but ask, Elder Fan, are you interested in playing with it? Fan Xingying glanced at the energy gun and said calmly, I probably haven't touched this kind of scrap metal for 90 years. The situation here is not right. Young lady, you should take it for self-defense. When the energy gun was in the woman's hand, she looked hesitant. Ding Meng could not help but ask, what's wrong? The woman's face turned red and her voice was as soft as a mosquito. Brother, I don't know how to shoot. When Ding Meng heard this, he almost vomited blood. It was one thing for a normal person to come to this place, but if you don't even know how to use a gun, what are you doing here? Traveling? Or looking for excitement? However, now is not the time to ask about these trivial details. Ding Meng took back the gun and lightly tiptoed. The huge gun whizzed in circles and flew up again. We don't need this thing. Here you go. Lao Sha stretched out his hand and caught it with a pa sound. He was slightly surprised. The opponent's control of his strength had reached the point of perfection. He was 30 to 40 meters in the air, yet he had kicked the gun back so casually. His accuracy was also very good. Although he was surprised, he could not help but feel a trace of gratitude. Thus, he opened his mouth and reminded, Friend, it will be very dangerous down there. My suggestion is that you take little sister Qing Yin and leave. We have people on the ground waiting for you. It was quite rare for him to say something like this as a white glove. After all, in his eyes, Ding Meng and Night Owl were both competitors. Night Owl's identity was there for all to see. But who was Ding Meng from? In any case, no matter who Ding Meng was, he was not stupid enough to treat Ding Meng as an ordinary origin ability user. No matter what, this person was undoubtedly a war supremacy. Furthermore, he had spent so much effort to come here. If the item was snatched away by his opponent, then he would have to face his employer's wrath. Chapter 340. Shaq G's warning came true 3 minutes later. Although the mutated crowd was still celebrating, the blood pool was slowly changing. The blood pool, which was already somewhat warm, started to boil. Suddenly, a large group of monsters emerged from the pool. For most of the people present, this was the first time they had seen a real Devouring Realm monster. It was easy to imagine the horror in their hearts. In fact, Ding Meng had seen this monster before. It was the flesh-eater battle armor that the rebel commander was piloting. However, this was a real flesh-eater battle armor. It had a small body and 4 long limbs. Its 2 arms were thick and long. When they hung down, they could touch the ground. Each hand had 10 sharp fingers. Its head was round and bald, but its eyes were 2 balls of demonic red. It looked extremely repulsive. The battle armor created by the Lue group was based on these characteristics of the Flesh Eater battle armor. However, when the real Flesh Eater battle armor appeared in a group, the terror it brought was not something that could be described with just a few words. Two Flesh Eater battle armor appeared and grabbed a person's limbs. The person was immediately torn in half. The Flesh Eater battle armor quickly grabbed the severed limbs and chewed on them. Now, hundreds of Flesh Eater battle armor appeared at once. The blood pool was immediately thrown into chaos. Although these were mutated people, they were also letting out terrifying cries. This was because these terrifying monsters were really eating people. Moreover, they were eating until not even the bones were left. Qing Yin, who was at the side, began to vomit again. This was because she saw a person's heart being dug out by a Flesh Eater battle armor. The heart was still beating in their hands, but the Flesh Eater battle armor did not hesitate to swallow it whole. Then it jumped and screamed in joy. The sound made one's hair stand on end. It was similar to the sound of Zhang Jian's troops charging. A group of Flesh Eater battle armor screamed in unison. Fan Chengying frowned. That's not right. Ding Meng asked, what's wrong? Fan Chengying said, these are all low-level soldiers. Under normal circumstances, they would not eat people. Their main attack is to bite and infect the enemy. Moreover, there are very few monsters in the devouring realm that eat people directly. While he was explaining, Little Rascal was also explaining to Ding Meng that the Flesh Eater's main method of attack was to bite a human's carotid artery, allowing the toxin to enter the human's bloodstream directly. Then, it would mutate and eventually take on their appearance. The mutated humans weren't the true world-devouring race, but they would turn around and attack humans. And those Flesh Eaters that had sucked human blood, after accumulating to a certain number, would evolve. In the blink of an eye, the 500 mutants were all devoured by the Flesh Eaters. Not even a single bone was left. At this time, Shadgu finally spoke up, attack. A dozen or so energy guns opened fire at the same time. Colorful energy bullets rained down like a torrential downpour. The Flesh Eaters couldn't react in time and were caught off guard. When the energy bullets hit the Flesh Eaters, the skin of the Flesh Eaters began to emit green smoke like a metal plate being corroded. Then a large part of the skin was charred. After being hit multiple times, the skin completely withered. If they were hit again, the explosion effect of the energy bullets would take effect. The Flesh Eaters were blown into countless pieces and pus with a bang. Shag Ge's first volley of fire was extremely powerful. Apart from the energy rifles in their hands, many of them also took out energy bombs and crystal bombs. They didn't even need to aim, they just opened the safety and threw them down randomly. After 5 seconds, the blood pool disappeared completely, as if it had turned into a bright white mirror. Broken limbs flew everywhere, and the pus was so dense that it formed a layer of yellowish-brown fog in the air. Even a tank would be torn apart by such an attack. Cease fire. Shadgu finally called for a halt. The lights slowly faded away, and the blood pool regained its calm. All the Flesh Eaters had been wiped out, and the remains were soaked in the pus. The pus seemed to have a life of its own, as it slowly dissolved the remains. The blood pool was as if nothing had happened. Someone spoke up, "Boss, it seems like it's done." "Done?" Shadgu laughed coldly. "It's just the beginning. I've already prepared everything for you. Continue." At this time, the blood pool boiled once more as large amounts of steam rose up. It seemed like something was about to emerge from the bottom. This time, there was only one thing that came out. It was a gigantic Flesh Eater that was at least 3 times bigger. Its skin was a strange shade of blue. Fan Chengying said calmly, "This is a martial-class monster. Those youngsters on top won't be easy to deal with." The moment the Flesh Eater emerged, it howled towards the sky. Then, it raised its left hand towards Shadgu and uttered a string of incomprehensible words. The Flesh Eater on the prototype had a speech recognition function. It translated for Ding Meng that the Flesh Eater was shouting, "Target, white monkey. Attack them and tear them apart." As the Flesh Eater howled, a large number of Flesh Eater soldiers appeared at the edge of the blood pool. These soldiers waved their limbs and crawled along the walls towards the ceiling. Their movements were fluid and fast, not at all inferior to a normal person's running. Attack together. Night Owl was no longer indifferent. He ordered his men to attack. His team was small in number, and their equipment wasn't that good, but they had done their homework beforehand. The moment the bullets from the energy guns hit the wall, it immediately formed a strong electric net. The moment the flesh eaters came into contact with the electric net, they were immediately enveloped by the energy flow and fell down, howling in pain. Night Owl spoke. Shaggu, we'll still have to rely on you guys for the equipment. Shaggu naturally understood what he meant. They could not simply fire at the walls. If the firepower was too strong, it might cause the walls to collapse. Night Owl was helping him hold back the walls while his men focused their firepower on the flesh eater in the middle. Therefore, the second round of firepower was even more intense. Shaggu's gun had also joined the battle. The front wheel was fully charged, and the crystal ball rapidly shot out a spiral of firepower similar to the plasma laser cannons on the spacecraft. It was very concentrated and eye-catching. He did not aim elsewhere, and instead, he aimed at the flesh eater's head. The flesh-eating warrior didn't even try to dodge, allowing Ding Meng to bombard it. Ding Meng took a closer look and realized that the warrior's skin and muscles were much tougher than the other imps. The energy bullets only managed to leave a small mark on its skin, unable to damage its flesh at all. Ding Meng thought to himself that this devouring realm truly lived up to its name. These flesh eaters were truly fearless of death. They were like a dense swarm of ants, constantly climbing up and falling down. Small flesh eaters were constantly being blasted apart in the pool, but new flesh eaters were constantly being born. This was exactly what Liang Yiran had described. Their reproductive abilities were extremely strong, and most of them had no sense of self, nor did they have any fear, nor did they know death. It was hard to imagine how cruel the Holy Grail Federation was when they fought against such a ferocious enemy during the invasion of the devouring world half a century ago. Moreover, these were only low-level monsters. He did not know what the higher-level monsters were like. The most shocking thing was that if the devouring world was already like this, it was even harder to imagine how powerful the mechanical army of the frogmen were. Fan Chungying seemed to know what Ding Meng was thinking. She took the initiative to say, "There will be casualties soon." As soon as she finished speaking, a large number of monsters emerged from the blood pool. These flesh eaters were different from the previous batches. As soon as they emerged, they immediately opened their sharp mouths and stuck out their long, thin tongues. Ding Meng noticed that under the tongues of these monsters, there were actually meatloaf, but they looked more like tubes. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Black venom spurted out from the tube, shooting up into the sky like a sharp arrow. The speed of the venom was not considered fast, but it was difficult for the people in the air to dodge. Everyone swayed their bodies, making themselves float in the air to avoid the venom. However, the venom shot out by 40 to 50 flesh eaters was like a rain of arrows. It would be strange if they could dodge it completely. Many people's armor was unavoidably hit by the highly corrosive venom. It was like an energy bomb hitting a monster. The surface of the armor was corroded with a sizzling sound, and a crack appeared in the armor after 4 or 5 hits. There was no doubt that the people inside would be poisoned immediately. At this time, Night Owl and the rest were unable to cope with the increasing number of monsters. Many of the flesh eaters climbed to the same position and leapt into the air. Unfortunately, the poisoned person was pounced on by one of the flesh eaters. The flesh eater was unable to bite him. After all, the crack in the armor was too small. The flesh eaters clung onto the armor and clawed at it. The equipment of Shashik's team was not weak, and the alloy of the armor was definitely very tough. It was impossible for the monsters to bite through it. However, with this entanglement, the poisoned person's swaying became much weaker. There were 5 to 6 flesh eaters pouncing on him from all directions. He alone was equivalent to carrying 1,000 pounds of weight. When the monsters on the walls saw that someone had been poisoned, they all pounced on him. In the blink of an eye, the poisoned person became a meatball. At this time, The grappling hook at the top could no longer bear such a huge weight. With a click, the grappling hook broke free from the ceiling. The poison monster screamed in horror as it fell. As it fell, the monsters that were climbing up saw this and pounced on the meatball. It looked like countless mosquitoes were whizzing towards it from all directions. In this situation, even if Ding Meng wanted to save him, it was too late. The huge meatball crashed into the pool with a plop. The poisoned person did not even have time to scream before he was drowned by the monsters and the venom below. Fan Chungying was expressionless. His tone was very calm. You don't even have the strength of a war sovereign, and you still dare to come to this damned place. Although Ding Meng was somewhat sympathetic, he had to admit that Fan Chungying's point of view made sense. It was true that the white gloves wanted to make money, but to take orders, they had to be tailored to their needs. If you didn't have the strength of a war sovereign, then don't do the same thing as a war sovereign. This hellish radiation zone was really not a place for an origin energy warrior. Chapter 341. The battle continued, and it was clear that Sha Shige and Night Owl's groups were unable to hold on. The flesh-eaters continued to pour out of the blood pool, as if there was no end to them. Fan Chungying spoke again. Only after we defeat this flesh-eater warrior will these monsters stop. He was using origin energy to speak, so his voice was clearly heard by the people above. Sha Shige's spirit was roused. Many thanks for the reminder, Senior. After saying this, he retracted the steel wire and dove down from the sky, aiming for the flesh-eater warrior's head. His charge was not weak at all, and the surrounding flesh-eaters continued to charge at him. Sha Shige was clearly different from the person who had been poisoned earlier. He twisted his body slightly in the air, constantly switching between fists, elbows, palms, and knees. With a very confident stance, he charged forward as well. The flesh-eaters that were charging at him were all sent flying, and some of them even exploded in midair. It was clear that he had a high level of attainment in tremor force. Seeing that the newcomer was not trapped, the flesh-eater in the pool howled again. It opened its mouth and spat out a black acid 1 meter in diameter, aiming for Sha Shige. In this sort of situation, dodging was extremely difficult. It was not to say that it was impossible, but if you really tried to dodge, then the momentum of your charge would be greatly reduced. This sort of life and death battle was all about one's breath. Once that breath was weak, it would not be able to produce the kind of might one imagined. Sha Shige clearly understood this principle, so he did not even try to dodge, directly charging at it. The acid hit him without question, and with a hua-la sound, the armor was immediately torn apart. The remnants of the armor turned into black smoke in the air, but Sha Shige's real body was completely unharmed, falling down like a cannonball. With a wave of his hand, a straight and wide yellow alloy blade appeared. With a few flashes of yellow light, half of the flesh-eater's head was cut off, and its right arm was severed from the shoulder. Surprisingly, the ferocious warrior hadn't fallen yet. It roared and charged forward. Looking at its actions, it seemed like it wanted to press Shag good to death in the blood pool. While Shag Lu's moves were beautiful, he did not expect the World Devourer to be so powerful. While he was still in a daze, the World Devourer suddenly let out an earth-shattering roar as a thin, round purple beam of light shot out from its chest. The beam of light was naturally an energy sword, which struck its vitals and broke the World Devourer's spine, directly incapacitating it. Night Owl had appeared behind the World Devourer at some point in time, and with a jerk of her hand, the energy sword was pulled back. Only then did Sha Shige come to his senses. With another backhand slash, the remaining half of the ferocious warrior's head was completely separated from its body. The huge body fell heavily into the blood pool. 3 seconds later, it exploded with a pop sound, sending up 6 to 7 meters of yellow and black pus. With the death of the fierce warrior, the rest of the flesh-eaters screamed and retreated, quickly diving into the blood pool under the suppression of the fierce firepower. Fan Chungying nodded and said calmly, "Not bad." She was referring to the fact that Sha Shige and Night Owl were standing in the blood pool. The fact that the two of them were not afraid of the poison meant that they were not weak. Of course, this was relative. The blood pool could only summon low-level monsters, so the poison was limited. Old Shah, the world devours monsters are not like us humans. They will not die unless they are fatally wounded, Night Owl said proudly. Sha Shige ignored him and walked straight to the entrance. Thank you both. Although Ding Meng and Fan Chungying did not move at all, Ding Meng had saved Qing Yan, and Fan Chungying had warned him. Sha Shige was very grateful. These two were not ordinary people. At this moment, Night Owl was still in the blood pool. He used his energy sword to poke around in the liquid for a few times. Then, with a light flick of his boot, he reached out and grabbed a shiny object. Ding Meng smiled. My friend, can I have a word with you? Night Owl turned his head to look at him. His eyes narrowed into a line, but he did not reply. Actually, his little actions had been noticed by Ding Meng and Fan Qingying a long time ago. The world devours monsters all had crystal skeletons in their bodies. They were similar to the origin points in the bodies of origin ability users. They were a body of energy that stimulated the body's potential. The energy within the crystal skeletons depended on the composition of the energy absorbed and the environment in which they grew. Night Owl must have been entrusted by his employer to find the crystal skeletons and bring them back for research. Fan Chungying spoke. Little brother, you've seen it for yourself. The World Devourer's zone has appeared within the Federation's territory. This place is very strange. Why don't we study your crystal skeletons together? We won't stand in your way. This time, he used even more origin energy when he spoke. To Night Owl, every word was like thunder exploding in his ears. The pressure was not something he could resist. Actually, this voice was so loud that it made his scalp go numb. However, he still smiled and walked over, tossing the crystal skeletons to Fan Chungying. Since Senior likes it, then take it and play with it. We're not in a hurry. We can always look for more. There was nothing he could do about it. Origin Energy Generals were just that domineering. If you didn't listen, a single wave of their aura would cause you to lie on the ground, unable to breathe. After Fan Chungying took the crystal skeletons, she handed them over to Ding Meng. Ding Meng quietly stared at the crystal skeletons in his hands. These crystal skeletons were similar to ordinary crystals, but there was a powerful poisonous energy flowing through them. This was very easy to understand. It was a poison from the World Devourer's zone. However, it suddenly began to emit an extremely unusual fluctuation. If one could describe it, it was the energy of the inverse origin crystal from the Starbow Blue Moon branch. However, its frequency was too low. It took about half a minute for a sliver to spread out, and the energy was very weak. At a rough estimate, it was only a few hundred thousandths of the inverse origin crystal's energy. However, it was this sliver of fluctuation that made Ding Meng raise his guard. This was because this fluctuation gave him a soul-stirring feeling. It was fine if he didn't stare at it, but the more he probed it with his telekinesis, the stronger this feeling became. Little rascal, can you analyze its composition? Ding Meng couldn't help but ask. Shout, AI said, my apologies, a CT5570? This kind of fluctuation is beyond the scope of my knowledge. In addition, I can't find a comparable sample in my database. Based on my calculations, this strange fluctuation is definitely not part of the energy composition known to the Holy Grail Federation and the Norse Empire, and it's very likely that it doesn't belong to the World Devourer's zone. Ding Meng was shocked. You're saying that this thing doesn't belong to human civilization, nor does it belong to the World Devourer's zone? Shout, AI said, you can understand it that way. Ding Meng said, Little rascal, what do you think? Little rascal was silent for a long time before replying, Sorry, Ding Meng, I can't analyze it either. However, I have a strong feeling that I've seen this thing before, but I just can't remember. This statement was obviously a bit contradictory. From the underground worship of Black Old Base to this damn place, Ding Meng had definitely experienced everything Little Rascal had experienced along the way. Ding Meng had also seen everything Little Rascal had seen, including the various databases that Little Rascal had copied. The information in these databases have been injected into Ding Meng's brain in the form of information streams. However, Ding Meng was sure that this was the first time he had seen this thing. Forget it. I can't see anything wrong with it either. Ding Meng calmly returned the crystal to Night Owl. Take it. Elder Fan also said that he won't block your path to wealth. Thank you very much then. Night Owl put away the crystal and turned around to wave his hand. We found the target. Brothers, we can leave now. None of his team members had died, and only 2 of them had suffered some serious damage to their armor. However, Shazji's team had lost 4 people. This was a huge loss, and the crystal couldn't belong to him. Therefore, when he saw Night Owl and his team of 8 turn back, his expression didn't look too good. Don't be discouraged, there's still a chance. Ding Meng consoled him. Qing Yin, on the other hand, was a bit dejected. This opportunity isn't easy to come by. Ding Meng frowned and asked, why is that? Qing Yin said, an opportunity like this will only appear 42 times out of 864 coordinates spread across the 3 planets every 2 months. Moreover, there's no pattern to the appearance, and all the coordinates are random. Ding Meng was starting to understand why she had come with the team. Miss Qing Yin, are you a statistician or an expert? Qing Yin didn't answer, but her expression showed that she agreed. Fan Qingying said, however, this doesn't explain why these mutants would come to this place to die. Shazgu sighed. Senior, we're just following orders. Please understand. I understand. Fan Qingying said calmly. You can't reveal the employer, motive, background, reason, specific mission, and so on. We have no right to ask, but as you can see, this place is very strange. To be safe, I suggest that you return to the surface first. Shazgu sighed. To be honest, we can only land on the immortal weaving planet for a short period of time. If we return now, it'll be very difficult to wait for another opportunity. Fan Qingying didn't necessarily understand this, but Ding Meng knew what he meant. These 2 groups of white gloves must have used some kind of special method to get past the military's blockade. They would probably only be able to use this once, and it would be impossible for them to use it a second time. Ding Meng looked at him and said, I'm not afraid to tell you the truth. We don't know the depth of this place either. We're just here to take a look. If you have any other ideas, you can tell us. We can all think of a way together. He knew this because of the map at the end of the exam. In this kind of unknown environment, it was difficult for people to trust each other. However, it was often necessary for people to work together to find the key clues. Ding Meng had a strong intuition that this place was definitely a radiation zone. However, this was definitely not the full picture of the radiation zone. At the very least, this blood pool was definitely not the core location. This was because he still couldn't sense the existence of any infectious psychokinesis. If he couldn't find the source, then the tens of thousands of civilians and refugees on the surface, including the 2 armies, wouldn't be able to solve the infection problem. Taking a step back, the mission that Du Peixing had entrusted to him could end here. However, he might not be able to bring Zhong Ting, Uncle Fu, Zhan Qijuan, and the others away from the immortal weaving planet. This was especially true for Zhong Ting. She had clearly made up her mind to tide through this crisis with the refugees under her care. Therefore, Ding Meng opened her mouth again. This time, she asked a little more directly, just tell me what you know. Chapter 342. Shashige sighed. Actually, this crystal skeleton has a lot of research value. Fan Qingying asked, what kind of research value? Shashige said, it's not a normal energy body. Apart from crystal energy, origin energy, and poison, it also contains an unknown energy source. Right now, many energy companies on the market are hoping to obtain a sample for research purposes. Ding Meng knew that he wasn't spouting nonsense. His investigation just now had confirmed that he wasn't lying. The question is, why would such a crystal skeleton appear here? Qing Yan explained, Brother Ding, let me explain it to you this way. This energy source is the reason why this place is able to block outside detection. Ding Meng said in surprise. You're saying that this crystal skeleton can block out quantum detection? Qing Yan nodded and said, my research results show that this is indeed the case. Little Rascal slapped his forehead. No wonder those energy companies are trying to get a sample. Once this energy source is thoroughly researched and put into use, shuttles, spaceships, battleships, and even entire interstellar fleets can become invisible. If such a heaven-defying technology is patented, won't those companies be able to make a fortune? Xiao AI said, not necessarily. Little Rascal was stunned. What? Xiao AI said, if that's really the case, then the principle behind this energy source isn't as easy to obtain as you think. Besides, there are still many mysteries in this place that we haven't figured out yet. Ding Meng nodded in approval. He had a few questions right now. First, where exactly was the source of this infectious psychic power? Second, why would these infected people come here to die? Why would they come to this cave filled with poisonous liquid instead of other places? Third, was there really a wormhole in this place? Ding Meng's gaze suddenly fell on the blood pool. It seems like we'll have to go down there to figure this out. Brother, Fan Chengying was shocked. You have to be careful. This blood pool was undoubtedly connected to the more complex core of the devouring realm, but no one dared to go down there, including Fan Chengying, an Origin Energy general. He was able to resist the poison because the poison in the current environment was still within his tolerance range, but it was hard to say if he went down any further. Moreover, the depths of the blood pool were unknown, so going down recklessly was extremely risky. Ding Meng waved his hand and said, it's fine if I go down. As he spoke, he took off the wristband on his wrist. Elder Fan, put this on. Go back and ask the military for help in my name. If they don't believe you, send the video message recorded inside and ask the military to evacuate the uninfected civilians from the riot area as soon as possible. Fan Chengying took the wristband and said hesitantly, Brother, what do you mean? Ding Meng said, I have a feeling that this is not good. I'm afraid that more and more people will come to die. Fan Chengying nodded and carefully put away the wristband. Ding Meng said, if it's possible, tell your men to retreat as well. Fan Chengying hesitated. Will this work? Ding Meng nodded and said, yes, I can. My authorization level is very high. It's the direct authorization of the 819th Air Combat Legion's SSN 6L9 T1 Special Class Fleet Commander. Fan Chengying had obviously heard of this famous fleet long ago. He couldn't help but take a deep breath. Brother, Fan Chengying, owe you a big favor this time. Ding Meng smiled. Elder Fan, you're too polite. I just don't want to have too many casualties. Based on the current situation, the infection will only increase. Fan Chengying said with a serious face, don't worry. I'll tell everyone to retreat as soon as I get up there. Brother, you must be careful. If there's anything wrong, come up and meet up with me. Ding Meng nodded. Only then did his gaze fall on Shag Ge. Suddenly, he asked a more direct question. How many people did Shanghao Corporation send this time? Who's in charge of the overall situation? Shag Ge and the others' expressions changed. Qin Yin said in surprise, How did you know? Ding Meng stretched out his finger and flicked Shag Ge's shoulder armor. Shanghao Corporation is not good enough to send you to your deaths. Shag Ge's face was full of shock. Brother Ding, what do you mean? Ding Meng sighed. The material of your armor should have been the material of the 7th generation battle armor. I don't know if Shanghao Corporation was too stingy or if they did it on purpose, but they gave you guys the worst quality equipment. Qin Yin couldn't help it. I'm from Shanghao Corporation. I don't believe it. Ding Meng glanced at her and snorted coldly. Then why can't you even resist the lowest level poison in the devouring realm? This. Qin Yin was stunned. Ding Meng continued. I don't know why Shanghao Corporation did this, but I've fought with your battle armor before. Trust me. After saying that, he couldn't be bothered with their shock. He drove the prototype into the air and dived into the center of the blood pool with a whoosh. The pool was naturally filled with so thick that it was almost solid. The prototype's performance was truly amazing. The surface layer, made of biotechnology, would absorb the poison the moment it came in contact with it. The system quickly analyzed it and then transformed the surface layer into hardened skin. In other words, the system had turned the metal of the prototype into the skin of a flesh eater. Of course, it wasn't a real change, but it was adapting to the surrounding poison so that it wouldn't be corroded. The prototype was now like an underwater submarine. Because the liquid was too thick, Ding Ming couldn't see anything with his naked eye. Moreover, the prototype's detection function was now useless. He could only rely on his telekinesis vision to find his way. The effective range of his telekinesis vision was 5 kilometers, so it was easy for Little Rascal and the others to map out the underwater terrain. If the blood pool above was the entrance, then below it were countless densely packed tunnels that intersected like the capillaries of a human body. Each tunnel was extremely narrow, and the widest one was only wide enough for 2 people to pass through. Moreover, from the densely packed tunnels, it was likely that there was more than one place like the blood pool. Ding Ming's train of thought was to dive deeper. The reason was simple. Since the ground was filled with poison, then the source must be at the very bottom. Little Rascal kept calculating the depth. 3,000 meters, 3,500 meters for 1,500 meters. When he reached 5,000 meters, Ding Ming finally felt a trace of fluctuation. Moreover, he was certain that it wasn't a fluctuation of origin energy. This fluctuation was extremely strange. It was like a ripple on the surface of a water. When it passed through a person's body, it would cause them to feel a sense of shock, causing their mind to go blank for a moment. Infectious telekinesis, confirmed without a doubt. Xiao AI usually used this tone to speak, so there was no way she was wrong. Little Rascal's voice also grew excited. New target discovered. In truth, Ding Ming had also sensed that a dot of light had appeared in front of him. The dot of light gradually transformed into a glowing eye. When he was about 300 meters away from the glowing eye, a hair-raising scene occurred. The glowing eye flashed red, and an eye flipped out from within. Ding Ming could be considered to have seen his fair share of bizarre things, but none of them had made him feel more horrified than this one. This eye was indeed a human eye. Just like the eyes of the flesh-eating warrior from before, it emitted a demonic red glow. The eye was over 20 meters in diameter. Its pupil didn't move, but for some reason, it felt like it was alive and was staring fixedly at him. This feeling was indescribable. Even though Ding Ming's mental fortitude had always been good, he still felt as if a shadow had been cast over his heart at this moment. What is this thing? Ding Ming also felt a chill run down his spine. This was because the eye was constantly emitting waves of energy. The waves weren't large, and the frequency wasn't high, but it still made him feel uncomfortable. Xiao AI spoke without hesitation. The infectious telekinesis was created by this thing. It's the source. Little Rascal said, strange. It doesn't have the characteristics of a living being, nor is it a carrier, but the energy it possesses is unprecedentedly powerful. At this time, Ding Ming stopped flying and observed this thing from afar. It had no heat or poison, but from time to time, it would emit ripples in all directions. Moreover, only Ding Ming could detect these ripples. It doesn't seem to be hostile, Little Rascal reminded. Ding Ming also sensed it. He piloted the prototype closer. What is this thing? Xiao AI was silent for a long time. According to my analysis, it should be some kind of equipment. Equipment? Ding Ming and Little Rascal were both confused. This was clearly a ball of energy. How could it be equipment? Xiao AI said. But that's the result of my calculations. As soon as she said this, the eye of light finally changed. It suddenly expanded into a circle of light that resembled a two-way vortex. At the center of the vortex was Ding Ming. The system also sounded an alarm. Unknown energy detected. Lock onto this device. Not good. Ding Ming decisively retreated. As he retreated, the eye suddenly emitted an even more dazzling light, which instantly engulfed the prototype. Ding Ming sensed that this light contained an extremely powerful restraining force. It fixed him and the prototype in place, making it impossible for him to move. It wasn't like he hadn't experienced this feeling before. Little Rascal cried out in surprise. This energy, it seems to be music shadow transmission. Back in Black Gold Base, Xinjie had used music shadow transmission to teleport Ding Meng away. It was the same feeling he was experiencing now. Xiao AI's voice turned cold. No, it's more advanced than music shadow transmission. It's some kind of teleportation device. Little Rascal said. The devouring world's teleportation formation? Ding Meng didn't have time to reply. His vision blurred. Everything around him, including the ghostly eye, warped and distorted. The entire world was plunged into darkness. This was true darkness. Ding Meng couldn't sense any trace of life around him. It was as if his entire being had fallen into the abyss of the void. Could this really be a teleportation formation? This was Ding Meng's last thought. Chapter 343. Xiao AI's assessment was spot on. Ding Meng's vision and senses returned to normal, and the dark world became bright again. When he looked up, he was instantly stunned on the spot. This was a cave that was identical to the cave where the blood pool was located. The only difference was that it was no longer a primitive cave. It was a square hall, and the floor and walls were made of smooth stone slabs. Ghost eyes appeared on the four walls of the hall. There were a total of 16 of them, and they seemed to be embedded in the walls. The red and white light dyed the entire hall with a layer of strange colors. The prototype system quickly generated a series of information. Current environment is not polluted, oxygen is sufficient, no toxins are present, and the temperature and humidity are similar to the surface. Xiao AI's tone was surprisingly surprised. The underground map I generated has suddenly lost its effect. It cannot be shown in the current environment. This is a new space. According to my scans and calculations, she only finished half her sentence. Ding Meng was a little nervous. What happened to us? Xiao AI's voice was cold. I'm afraid we are no longer on the immortal Weaver planet. While what? Ding Meng and Little Rascal were completely shocked. Only the two of them knew the weight of Xiao AI's words. If the ghost eyes were a teleportation portal to the devouring world, it did not matter whether they were teleported or not. The environment they were in now should be filled with toxins. But did this place look like the devouring world? There was only one possibility. The ghost eyes were teleportation portals that were more advanced than the technology of the Federal Empire. Little Rascal was sure that among the various teleportation portals of the Holy Grail Federation, there was no technology that was faster, less energy-consuming, and more accurate than the ghost eyes. Is this an extraterrestrial civilization? Ding Meng was so shocked that he could not help but ask. No. An old voice came from behind him. This is the core of the Dawn Army's base. If the teleportation portal was shocking enough, then this voice was even more shocking. The voice was less than 100 meters away from him, and he could not sense that there was someone behind him. Ding Meng slowly turned around. An old man in a rebel army uniform slowly walked towards the center of the room. The old man looked a little old, but his temperament was exactly the same as Fan Chungying's. His entire body was filled with majesty, which made people feel reverence. Ding Meng suddenly thought of something and immediately asked, Quan Jinwei? Quan Jinwei was also slightly surprised. I didn't expect you to recognize me. Ding Meng secretly activated his origin ability. You're the leader of the rebel army? Quan Jinwei couldn't help but laugh. Did the military tell you that? Rebel army, resistance army, Liberty Wings? Ding Meng didn't say anything. He secretly released his telekinesis to investigate. Something even more ridiculous happened. All the telekinesis dots that approached Quan Jinwei turned into nothingness like mud sinking into the sea. There seemed to be an invisible force on Quan Jinwei's body that dissolved them. Ding Meng finally felt astonished. This Quan Jinwei's strength wasn't below Fan Chungying's. It could even be said that he was more terrifying than all the experts he had met before, including Colonel Feng, Sister Zhong, the group of teachers from Starlight, Headmaster Zhu Bin, and Fan Chungying. Quan Jinwei seemed to know that Ding Meng was investigating him. He suddenly cried out in pleasant surprise, "Yeah, you're actually a flux, sir." Although his tone sounded pleasantly surprised, Ding Ming felt an extremely dangerous aura. Ding Ming couldn't care less. This time, he increased his telekinesis and released 300 telekinesis dots in one go. They formed a net that enveloped the other party from all directions. He didn't believe that Quan Jinwei could dissolve such a powerful telekinesis attack. Quan Jinwei indeed couldn't dissolve it, but the telekinesis dots couldn't see his entire body. After 3 seconds, Ding Ming's heart sank. His telekinesis vision clearly showed that Quan Jinwei's eyes were emitting a demonic red light. It was completely the same as the ghost eyes on the wall and the flesh eaters in the blood pool. There wasn't the slightest bit of difference. He's been infected, and the degree of infection is much deeper than Fan Chungying's. Little Rascal's voice also became serious. Moreover, his body doesn't seem to have any signs of a normal human being, but he looks very normal, Xiao AI said. As expected, after Quan Jinwei sensed Ding Ming's investigation, a sincere expression appeared on his face. Your cultivation isn't bad. You can join us. Join you? Ding Ming frowned. Join the rebel army? Quan Jinwei stopped 30 meters away from Ding Ming. Not the rebel army, but our Dawn army. We need talents like you. Dawn army seems to have split up long ago, right? Ding Ming asked. Quan Jinwei waved his hand and said, It's not a split. We just want to get rid of those who are useless. We want to purify our army and improve our combat ability. Once you join us, you will obtain supreme power and achieve an unprecedented hegemony. I can guarantee you that you will obtain unimaginable wealth and resources. His expression was a little excited, but the more excited he was, the stronger Ding Ming's intuition of danger became. This person seemed to have a mental problem. After all, he was infected. Ding Ming calmed himself down. If you want me to join you, you should at least tell me where this place is. Quan Jinwei said, I told you just now. This is the core command center of the Dawn Army. Little Rascal said, It doesn't seem to be lying. Ding Ming probed, Where exactly are we now? Quan Jinwei answered without hesitation, We are now at the base of Linda's Thorn Planet, 20,000 meters underground. Even though Ding Ming and the other two were mentally prepared, they were still deeply shocked. The teleportation array just now had sent them 100 million kilometers away. What kind of freakish teleportation array was this? Ding Ming continued, What are these ghostly eyes on the wall? Quan Jinwei said proudly, This is our power. He's lying. Little Rascal immediately jumped out. The entire Holy Grail Federation doesn't have such high-end technology. His small Dawn army can't possibly have such power. Ding Ming nodded. What if I don't join? Quan Jinwei's expression changed. There are no ifs. You must join. Ding Ming smiled. There are no ifs. There are only ifs. Quan Jinwei's voice turned cold. It looks like I have no choice but to ask you to join right away. As he said this, Ding Ming finally sensed that soul-stirring fluctuation. It was none other than the infectious psychic wave. It almost instantly formed illusions around Ding Ming. This time, they weren't demons or ghosts, but all kinds of life forms and civilizations in the universe. Some were beautiful, some were evil, some were cute, and some were terrifying. There were terrestrial creatures, slimy creatures, anaerobic creatures, strange creatures, drifters, energy entities, special entities, degenerate entities. These life forms and civilizations formed a massive stream of information that circled around Ding Ming. Anyone would be deeply attracted to it. Xiao AI decisively called out, Circulate your origin energy and increase your psychic power. Ding Ming was shocked. He had almost fallen for the other party's trap. This infectious psychic power was truly all-pervasive. Naturally, it wasn't much in front of the universal psychic power. Ding Ming released 500 psychic power dots, which immediately formed a materialized force field around him. All the illusions were dispersed. Quan Jinwei felt as if his eyes had been pricked by a needle. He immediately closed his eyes and retreated 2 steps. He then smiled. I forgot that you're a fluxer. It just so happens that this kind of ability is exactly what I need. As soon as he said this, his body trembled slightly, and a formless origin energy immediately left his body. It twisted and folded like a transparent piece of paper and swept toward Ding Meng at a speed that wasn't too fast. Ding Meng still had some foresight. He knew that this level of origin energy couldn't be dodged. The moment he tried to dodge, it would firmly entangle him. Ding Meng stretched out his arm and lightly blocked it. After a muffled bang, the air immediately exploded. Quan Jinwei's eyes lit up. "And not bad. Your strength has exceeded my expectations." Although he was saying, "not bad," Ding Meng was still extremely shocked. This origin energy had shaken him back by more than 10 meters, and his right arm was faintly numb. The most astonishing thing was that this Quan Jinwei seemed to have cultivated an origin energy similar to the body-strengthening technique. When he had been shaken back, Ding Meng had felt that the other party's origin energy was exceptionally hard and tyrannical. Moreover, it also contained a kind of confining power, which made his hands and feet somewhat stiff. It had been a long time since he had encountered a formidable opponent. This time, Ding Meng had encountered an unprecedented powerhouse. He believed that Quan Jinwei's strength wouldn't be lower than that of a champion. The system's voice mode has been changed. Current mode is Hell level. Source core is ready. Conversion rate has been upgraded to 2.0 times. Upper limit of capacity has been successfully set. After changing the parameters of the initial prototype, Ding Meng didn't dare to be negligent. He operated the 7 origin points in his body at full power. The screen showed that his origin energy index had increased to 100/4, 500 points. Based on the origin energy index alone, he had used the initial prototype to raise his strength to the champion level. Quan Jinwei obviously sensed the eruption of origin energy in his body. His eyes lit up even more. "Not bad, not bad. You have a lot of things. I want this armor as well." This time, he pulled his palms apart, and a squarish golden body of energy appeared. He pushed his palms forward, and the body of energy quickly flew towards Ding Meng. Halfway through its flight, the body of energy transformed into a huge golden cage with a cracking sound. Based on the trajectory of its flight, it seemed like it was going to trap Ding Meng inside the cage. Perhaps this wasn't something to be afraid of in the eyes of others, but Ding Meng felt that the strength of this force field was simply unimaginable. As soon as it appeared, Ding Meng felt as if his limbs were filled with lead. This was definitely caused by the dense and vigorous origin energy of the Quan Jinwei system. "You want to fight me head-on? Fine, I'll fight you head-on." With this thought in mind, Ding Meng rushed towards the golden cage. Chapter 344. With a clang, Ding Meng, who was halfway through his charge, summoned a mirror image of a crown around his body. This was his first time exchanging blows with a warrior-level character, so he didn't dare to be careless in the slightest. With a crisp crack, the golden cage shattered into countless specks of light that scattered throughout the hall. Ding Meng's charge didn't stop. Before he even arrived, he had already slashed out with his 2 blades. He had mastered the Blazing Sun battle runes by now. Of course, this kind of attack wouldn't be able to hurt his opponent. Quan Jinwei's palms produced 2 glove-like balls of golden energy, which he gently parted to the sides. The blades formed from origin energy were also shattered into powder, just like the golden cage. At this moment, Ding Meng had already closed in on Quan Jinwei. He gathered all his strength and punched Quan Jinwei in the face. The wind generated by his fist was so fierce and hot that Quan Jinwei stopped underestimating him. He grabbed Ding Meng's fist with one hand and sent out another stream of pure origin energy from his palm. He had decided to let this young man have a taste of what it meant to ask for trouble. However, he was wrong this time. As soon as he sent out this stream of origin energy, Ding Meng's fist erupted with an even more violent force, instantly pushing back against his own origin energy. Flame energy rushing fist was just a cover. The real killing power was flame energy penetrating force. This force instantly drilled into his palm, along his arm, and shook his body. Quan Jinwei's reaction speed was really fast. Starting from his shoulders, he twisted his body in a very strange position, like a snake twisting and turning. Ding Ming's penetrating force was actually channeled into the ground. Boom! The ground violently collapsed, and countless stone slabs were shattered. Large chunks of stone flew into the air and exploded. For a moment, the hall was filled with smoke and dust. After the smoke and dust dissipated, a huge pit with a diameter of 30 meters appeared in the center of the hall. Furthermore, the bottom of this pit couldn't be seen. The power of this punch made Quan Jinwei reveal a serious expression. He stood at the edge of the crater and similarly circulated his origin ability. Earlier, his origin energy body had only formed a pair of gloves, but now it had spread to his entire body. It was as if he was wearing a set of golden armor. Ding Ming knew that this was because Quan Jinwei had cultivated the source substance protection technique to a very high level. It was as if he was wearing a set of high-grade alloy armor. Moreover, his entire body was emitting a golden mist that enveloped his real body. The system finally sounded the alarm. Target Origin Ability Index, 5,800/9,800 points. Little rascal couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Oh my god, almost 60 million points. This is an intermediate warlord with an extremely deep foundation. Ding Ming, let's retreat. This was also the first time Xiao AI did not suggest an immediate elimination. ACT 5570. The situation is dangerous. Evacuate immediately. Although it was said to retreat, the problem was, where should they retreat to now? There were a dozen or so tunnels around the hall, but they had yet to ascertain the terrain. If they couldn't get through this hurdle, they would die no matter where they ran. Ding Ming took a deep breath. This time, all 8 of his origin cores were operating at the same time. His origin ability core conversion rate had increased to 3.0 times, and his current origin ability index had increased to 4,000/5,000 points. He still hadn't surpassed Quan Jinwei's combat strength, but Ding Ming was confident that he could fight Quan Jinwei head-on. He leapt into the air, covering dozens of meters with each leap. He somersaulted in the air and executed his signature carp leaping over the dragon's gate. His current hand chop was just as powerful and domineering. When this chop was unleashed, his entire arm turned red. Even normal armor would be melted by this chop. Quan Jinwei seemed to know how powerful this chop was, so he didn't dare take it head-on. Instead, he waited until Ding Ming's chop was about to land on his temple before he raised his hands and used his wrist to clamp down on Ding Ming's chop. He then used the force of the chop to throw himself backward. Ding Ming was immediately thrown to the ground, but Ding Ming's reaction was extremely fast. When he landed, he kicked back into the air. There was another explosion. Quan Jinwei's forehead was struck, and he was forced back a few steps. A large part of the air was blasted apart, causing a cloud of dust to fill the air once again. A yellow figure floated through the cloud of dust. Quan Jinwei had actually switched from defense to offense. He began to punch and kick Ding Ming, who was on the ground. His attacks weren't fast, and each of his moves was methodical. However, Ding Ming was gradually beginning to feel the strain. This was because every time he clashed with Quan Jinwei, his opponent's punches and kicks would transmit an extremely powerful force that caused Ding Ming's punches and kicks to feel as if they were gradually being imprisoned. They were extremely heavy and consumed a lot of energy. In addition, Ding Ming's punches and kicks couldn't injure him at all. The layer of golden mist produced by the origin substance barrier greatly reduced Ding Ming's strength. Little rascal grew anxious. We can't continue like this. He's going to exhaust us to death sooner or later. When Ding Ming heard this, he fainted with a punch. After exchanging blows with Quan Jinwei, he retreated lightly. It was fine if he didn't retreat, but once he did, he encountered a problem. This was because halfway through his retreat, Ding Ming felt as if his back had collided with a large wall. When he scanned the area with his telekinesis vision, Ding Ming was instantly shocked. He didn't know when, but a giant golden wall had appeared behind him. This wall surface area completely filled up the cross-section of the hall, making it impossible for Ding Meng to dodge. There are also all kinds of complicated and profound diagrams and strange symbols floating on the wall. This was undoubtedly the opponent's ultimate move. When he raised his head again, he saw Quan Jinwei swinging his palms at Ding Meng from afar. Every time he swung his palms, a giant golden wall would appear in the hall and press down on Ding Meng from all directions. In that instant, Ding Meng felt as if he was about to suffocate. These walls were emitting an endless amount of sealing energy. Not only did they prevent him from moving, but the pressure was also increasing. It felt as if a real mountain was pressing down on him, crushing him to death. From afar, it looked as if Quan Jinwei's wall of holy splendor was stacked on top of each other. It was like a giant polygonal gemstone that firmly imprisoned Ding Meng within. Quan Jinwei couldn't help but laugh. "You didn't take the path to heaven, but chose the path to hell instead. I said I wanted you to join us, so you have to join us." The prototype finally sounded an alarm. The system's capacity has reached a critical value. "Please reduce the energy conversion." Ding Meng gritted his teeth and said, "Activate extreme mode." Little rascal was aghast. If you activate extreme mode, the silver core stone's energy will be converted to maximum power. If you try to break free from its control, there's a risk that the prototype will disintegrate, and you might also be seriously injured. This situation was similar to when he fought with an ice element expert. He was repeatedly trapped by the power of dark ice, and he had to think of a way to break free. However, this time, the power of dark ice had become a sealing force field for the hardened warrior. If he wanted to fight back, he had to use all his strength. If he didn't, he would die. The system's voice said, "Extreme mode has been activated. Current energy conversion rate is 5.0x. Current energy index is 62 million. The prototype has been attacked by an unknown energy. Damage rate is 22%. Ding Meng knew that success or failure depended on this one move. He waved his hand, and countless wing fragments immediately appeared in the form of catoptric deflection, which flew toward the walls around him. However, a jaw-dropping scene occurred. The fragments couldn't hit the walls at all because the sealing energy emitted by the walls had slowed them down. Ding Meng was dumbfounded. Xiao AI immediately explained, "That's because the sum of your telekinesis energy isn't greater than the energy of these walls." The walls were getting closer and closer. When they were less than 5 meters away, Ding Meng felt as if all the bones in his body were about to explode. He was now truly experiencing the strength of an Origin Energy General. This was only a hardened warrior that focused on defense, not a lightspeed or thermal warrior that focused on offense. If Quan Jinwei had been a lightspeed warrior, Ding Meng probably would have died long ago. What should he do? Ding Meng could sense that the origin in his body was slowing down, but Quan Jinwei showed no signs of stopping. In addition, the strange red light in his eyes was now visible to the naked eye. Little rascal finally panicked. "We're the greatest king. We can't lose to him." Xiao AI said, "That's right. We won't kneel and beg for mercy. If we're going to fight, we'll fight to the end." Ding Meng didn't need their encouragement. The closer he was to the brink of death, the more his fighting spirit soared. He suddenly laughed coldly. "You want me to join you? You're dreaming." Quan Jinwei stared at him fiercely. "Then you can die." Ding Meng waved his hand again. The catoptric deflection made a series of rapid cracking sounds and turned into a sword in the blink of an eye. Ding Meng endured the intense pain and forcefully operated the origin, especially the 8th point and the smelting essence. When the 8th point was successfully constructed, it established a connection with the 7 points in his heart. It also formed a virtual line with the diamond star fusing art. It was like a sword hidden inside his body. The hilt was the heart, while the tip was the brain. Now, this fiery red illusory sword had left his body. It was as if it had a life of its own. Under Quan Jinwei's bewildered gaze, the illusory sword and the catoptric deflection actually merged into one. Their entire body became bright red, as if they were burning fiercely, bursting forth with a monstrous battle intent. This was the origin energy method unique to the 8th point, the diamond star-fusing sword art. Its principle was to release origin energy externally. When Ding Meng's body was restrained, the refined essence would be injected into the weapon. It was different from ordinary energy injections. Ordinary energy injections only increased the temperature and heat of the weapon, but the diamond star-fusing sword art was equivalent to transplanting the effects of the origin from the body into the weapon, allowing the weapon to truly possess the energy of an origin energy user and carry out the will of an origin energy user. The person was the sword, and the sword was the person. The person and the sword were one. Go! Ding Meng waved his hand. The fiery red sword immediately rose above his head and burst forth with rings of light. It was faintly discernible, seeming both real and illusory. Child's play. Quan Jinwei laughed disdainfully. He continued to apply pressure with his palms. The space compressed by the wall of brilliance was getting smaller and smaller. At most, in 10 seconds, Ding Meng would be crushed into meat paste. However, in the next moment his smile froze. He also revealed a look of disbelief. Ding Meng had miraculously disappeared from the wall. 2 seconds later, 3 identical Ding Mengs appeared outside the wall. They were located in the center of the wall, on the left side of the wall, and on the right side of the wall. They vaguely formed a triangle. What is this thing? Quan Jinwei's face was full of surprise. Chapter 345. As a veteran Origin Energy General, especially a body-hardening general, he had experienced countless battles in his life. What kind of opponent had he not seen before? What kind of attack had he not faced? But what was happening right now was beyond Quan Jinwei's understanding. In his perception, the 3 Ding Meng in the sky and on the ground were not mirror images, nor were they illusions. They were real people, and even the movements they emitted were exactly the same. There was not the slightest difference. The key question was, how had Ding Meng teleported outside the wall? Was this some kind of secret technique? Quan Jinwei guessed. His guess was correct. This was indeed Ding Meng's secret technique, the single dance of the serene lotus. This was a divine technique that focused on defense and survival, and it was only used in moments of life and death. Unfortunately, Ding Meng had not practiced this technique for long enough, so he had not fully mastered it yet. But at this moment, it was enough for him to create 3 clones. The 3 Ding Meng wielded their swords in 3 different positions, and their origin energy fluctuations instantly increased by a large margin. Quan Jinwei did not have any detection devices, so he could not accurately assess Ding Meng's battle prowess. However, his past experience told him that his opponent's aura posed a great threat to him, even to his own life. He had no time to think. He pulled back his hand, and the many walls of the Wall of Holy Splendor changed directions, once again trapping the 3 Ding Meng within. At the same time, however, the 3 Ding Meng wielded their swords at an even faster speed. Countless thin, sharp, and long-range sword flashes shot out from their swords. These sword flashes did not fly directly toward Quan Jinwei, but instead converged with the sword flashes that Ding Meng had unleashed on the ground. They were like a tornado that had suddenly gathered, like a surging wave, or like a brilliant meteor shower in outer space. The sword flashed through the air, and the figure followed the sword. The tip of the sword was like an alligator soaring into the sky. Its strength was like a dragon's, and its form was like the wind. This was the second style of the solitary sword of Zhao, Prairie Fire Sword. Zhao Yu himself probably did not expect that Ding Meng would be able to practice this technique to such a terrifying degree on his own. Kill! The 3 Ding Mengs shouted in unison. The sword light on the ground had already gathered into a fireball. The fireball was no longer restricted by the Wall of Holy Brilliance. It fiercely hit the surface of the Wall of Holy Brilliance. Immediately, the Wall of Holy Brilliance let out a series of bang 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 sounds, which sounded like a pot of beans being fried. Quan Jinwei turned pale with fright. He waved his palms in the air again, and more walls flew out and attached themselves to the original gem prism. His intention was obvious. He wanted to strengthen the thickness of the walls to resist Ding Meng's assault. Unfortunately, it was useless. The fireball was like a boulder rolling down a high slope, crushing everything in its path. No matter how much pressure you put on it, you couldn't stop it. Not long after, there was a crisp ding-ling sound, and a hole was finally made in the wall. The entire hall was filled with red light, and the fireball's true body was revealed. It was not a real fireball, but a combination of source energy, sword light, and energy. Due to the suppression effect of the wall of holy brilliance, the confinement effect was now broken. The fireball turned into 3 magnificent energy streams and swept towards Quan Jinwei, drowning him in almost an instant. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. In the bright red energy flow, countless sword lights swarmed out. It was the scene of the battle against the Hercules armor on Boggle. Tens of thousands of swords shot out at the same time. It was colorful and brilliant, and the power of the swords was overwhelming. The 3 Dingming once again waved their swords. The swords and the people seemed to have merged into one. The 3 long white lights instantly merged into one and penetrated Quan Jinwei's body like lightning. The wall of holy brilliance disappeared, the energy streams disappeared, and the sword light disappeared. Ding Ming knelt on one knee on the edge of the crater, holding the sword in his hand and gasping for breath. After a few seconds of gasping, he opened his mouth and spat out a large cloud of blood. Behind him, there was no sound, no change, and no body. Quan Jinwei had been reduced to nothingness in the tidal wave of attacks. Not even a strand of his hair was left. He had been melted into nothingness by the immense heat. Xiao AI scanned for a long time before she breathed a sigh of relief. The target has been eliminated. I can't find any information about him in this hall. He should be dead. Little rascal cheered. Wah wah wah. Ding Ming, you defeated a champion. My God, you're amazing. Ding Ming had no way to answer the two of them. He was currently in a heavily injured state. Just now, he had used the solitary sword of Zhao, the solitary dance of the Dark Lotus, the Starry Diamond sword technique, and the origin smelting technique. He had long since overdrawn his origin energy. Now, all 8 of his origin points had dimmed. Not only did he need energy to recover, but he also needed time. In fact, the worst part was that he had attacked without holding back. The wall of holy brilliance had caused him great damage, and there were signs of fractures and lacerations all over his body. Ding Meng's face was pale. He immediately sat down cross-legged and used the last of the origin smelting technique's origin energy to heal himself. He was very clear that if it weren't for the fact that the first prototype had multiplied his origin energy and provided him with the greatest amount of protection, he wouldn't have had any chance of victory against Quan Jinwei. As such, he didn't feel the slightest bit of joy from his victory. On the contrary, Ding Meng's mood was very heavy. The first prototype's degree of damage had reached 71%, and it needed to be repaired. However, this kind of high-end biomechanical technology could only be done by Yao Manru herself. In order to prevent the first prototype from being completely destroyed, Ding Meng could only put the origin battle armor back into his bag. After taking care of all this, Ding Meng felt that his body was extremely weak compared to his normal state. His top priority was to leave this place and find a relatively safe place to quickly recover. There were 4 entrances to the hall, and he didn't know where they led. Ding Meng chose the northern entrance to leave. Just 10 minutes after he left, something he never dreamed of happened. At the bottom of the large pit in the center of the hall, a cloud of fog, energy, and a pool of dark blue liquid were slowly fusing together. After a long time, the fog dissipated and the liquid took shape. It was the shape of a person. Quan Jinwei lowered his head and looked at his spread-out hands. He then stretched his neck, and his shoulder joints cracked. After confirming that he was fine, he licked his lips and sighed. Not bad. This person suits my taste. He looked like he had been resurrected, but this time, his eyes had turned into cinnabar demon eyes that could be seen with the naked eye. If Ding Meng could see this scene, his jaw would probably drop to the ground. He didn't think that the other party could resurrect in such a strange way. Even stranger things were yet to come. After exiting the northern entrance, he found himself in an identical hall. However, there were no demonic teleportation arrays on the walls. After passing through 5 consecutive entrances, the scene was still the same. Ding Meng realized that this damned place really was like a maze. If he didn't have a complete map, he would be running around like a headless fly. The fierce battle had caused his strength to drop by more than half, so his perception and telekinesis vision had also weakened. After randomly passing through a few more entrances, Ding Meng decided to sit down in this hall to recover. There had never been a more dangerous operation than this one. After experiencing several life and death crises in the past, he at least had a clear understanding of his surroundings and the basic information of his enemies. However, this time, he was completely confused. There were too many strange phenomena and unknown factors in this underground world. He couldn't take any more risks. He had to quickly find a way out and ask the military for reinforcements. If he ran into another warrior-level character, he would undoubtedly die. Even the gods wouldn't be able to save him. Reconstructing the origin was something he was familiar with. The first 5 points could be reconstructed instantly, but the origin itself needed new origin energy to refine. The 6th, 7th, and 8th points needed to be replenished with energy like the inverse source crystal. After an unknown amount of time, Ding Meng, who was recovering, was woken up by Little Rascal. Detected slight origin energy fluctuations in the vicinity. Crap! Ding Meng's heart immediately sank. It definitely wasn't a good thing for someone to come at this time, because the probability of them being allies was very small. A minute later, Ding Meng stood up. Because the other party was coming from the direction of this hall, it seemed like he couldn't avoid them even if he wanted to. There were a total of 4 people, 3 men and 1 woman. After seeing these 4 people clearly, Ding Meng's heart sank completely. No matter how much he thought about it, he still didn't expect it to be like this. He had seen the person on the leftmost side of the group before. It was Jia Hua, who he had fought against on the Falcon spacecraft. In front of Jia Hua was a tall and handsome man. He was calm and had an extraordinary bearing. This person was Chu Yifeng. Walking side by side with Chu Yifeng was a woman in professional attire. If it weren't for the fact that his eyes were playing tricks on him, Ding Meng would have mistaken her for Julie. However, she clearly wasn't Julie, and the impression she left on Ding Meng was much deeper than Julie's. This person was actually Lan Bing. Behind Lan Bing was another person. This man was wearing gray clothes and a pair of old-fashioned aviator sunglasses. However, Ding Meng felt that this person was the most dangerous. He was still 50 meters away, but the bone-chilling aura he emitted was very clear. These weren't origin energy fluctuations, but a natural aura. It was obvious that the number of lives this man had taken was no less than 3 digits. This was the first time Chu Yifeng had seen Ding Meng in real life. After sizing up Ding Meng a few times, he couldn't help but frown. He doesn't seem to be much. This question was directed at Lan Bing. What he meant was that Ding Meng, who had killed Julie, escaped from the base, stolen the cave virus, killed Hao Feng, caused havoc on Baigu Planet and Meteor City, and attracted the attention of the old man, was actually this week. Lan Bing's attitude was still as cold as ever. She was like an iceberg that could never be melted. However, this time, she frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "He's injured." These 5 short words immediately raised Ding Meng's vigilance and alertness. If Lan Bing could see that he was injured, it meant that her strength had improved in the past 2 years. Perhaps it wasn't just improvement, but a qualitative leap. The current situation bodes ill for them in the truest sense of the word. Chapter 346. He's injured? Chu Yifeng was a little surprised. Someone who could injure Ding Meng couldn't be weak. Currently, Ding Meng's information in the Haitian group's database had been changed again and again. As the top scorer of the Starlight examination, Ding Meng couldn't hide this news from the Chu family. If a combat master was injured, could it be that the person who fought with Ding Meng was an advanced combat master? Or a beginner warlord? Chu Yifeng didn't think of the latter at all. but his reaction was still very fast. Could there be someone from Sheng Hao group down there? Ding Ming was now a member of Star Rainbow. Only Sheng Hao would dare to go against Star Rainbow. Jia Hua said with a sullen face. Very likely. Chu Yifeng smiled faintly. This is getting interesting. At this time, the man in sunglasses spoke. His voice was cold and deep. Do you want to keep him or take him away? Lan Bing said. Just to be safe, take him away. The man in sunglasses sounded a little surprised. Oh, Lan Bing said. The old man has sent back a message. He has found the other half of the memory chip in the Norse Empire and is on his way back. This time, it wasn't just Chu Yifeng and Jia Hua who were shocked. Even Ding Ming was deeply shocked. Back then, everyone had fought so hard for the energy carrier of the K-virus. Half of it was given to Roalan, who then passed it on to Elder Feng. Elder Feng was a high-ranking official in the Nuashing Empire's military. No matter how useless the Norse Empire's military was, it couldn't be that they couldn't even protect a carrier, right? However, Chu Mingliang actually got his hands on the other half. This was simply, Ding Ming didn't know how to describe it. He recalled Yao Manru's advice before he left. Chu Mingliang is also over 200 years old. To be able to live to this age, he naturally has his own uniqueness. The Chu family once again refreshed Ding Ming's understanding of the Colossus that was the Haitian group. However, after hearing Lan Bing's answer, the man in sunglasses immediately understood. Although the memory of the K-virus had been found, Ding Ming was still very valuable as he was the one who had fused with the K-virus. It would be a waste to destroy him directly, so they had to capture him alive. The man in sunglasses glanced at Ding Ming and suddenly changed his mind. This kid is seriously injured. He's not worth my time. You guys take care of him. Jiahua immediately stepped forward. I'm here. I'm here to collect my cousin's debt on Cypress Ancient Star. Chu Yifeng decisively waved his hand to stop him. Brother Jia, you have 10,000 ways to torture this brat in the future. Let me do it now. Don't underestimate him. Jiahua immediately nodded. Yes, I will remember the old man's instructions. Chu Yifeng said, It's good that you remember. The four of them were talking one after another, completely ignoring Ding Ming. In their eyes, Ding Ming was a dead man. Ding Ming secretly sighed. He quietly twisted his wrist, and the T-shaped claw knife was already at his cuff. With his current physical condition, he really couldn't use his telekinesis to use catoptr deflection anymore. He also couldn't use his origin energy on a large scale. His body couldn't support such a high consumption. Only this weapon could face the enemy. Every time he held this hero's knife, Ding Ming felt a surge of confidence. He believed in justice, and he also believed in fate. Just like Brother Zheng Ming said, death was not something to be afraid of. A person was destined from birth to death. He had walked the path he should have walked and completed the mission he should have completed. This was something he had to experience in his life. If I'm destined to die here today, then I'll die a heroic death in battle. I'll never kneel and beg for mercy. I'll be like my predecessors. For the goal and belief in my heart, regardless of whether I can achieve it or not, I'll do my best. For a moment, many people's voices and smiles appeared in front of Ding Ming's eyes. The next moment, his heart was unprecedentedly calm because he wasn't afraid. Instead, he was facing his impending death head-on. Chu Yifeng took 2 steps forward, and a cruel smile appeared on his face. This is the first time we've met. Yes, Ding Ming replied coldly. Chu Yifeng laughed. How did you treat her in the past? Now, I'm returning it to you. Naturally referred to Lan Bing. The scar on Lan Bing's face was still clearly visible. In the eyes of others, this was a kind of cruel beauty, but in Chu Yifeng's eyes, it was a disgrace. I love my woman so much that I can't wait to protect her. How dare you hurt her? How dare you? Come. Ding Ming seemed very calm. Chu Yifeng didn't waste any time. His body flashed, and he appeared in front of Ding Ming. His 2 palms directly smashed towards Ding Ming's face. He had at least 20 years of hard training on this pair of palms, and his concept wasn't bad either. This palm strike was Zhao Yu's concept of a stab. It was fierce, fast, and powerful. At the same time, it was simple, direct and pure. There was nothing fancy about it, so it was very difficult to dodge it. Even if you could dodge it, you would be in a passive position. Ding Meng didn't dodge. From the moment he attacked, he could tell that Chu Yifeng was a tough nut to crack. It would be very difficult to defeat him without facing him head-on. So Ding Meng faced the two palms head-on, and his hand chopped up from below. Bang! The air exploded again, and everyone's vision was shaken. Jiahua was dumbfounded. Chu Yifeng was forced to retreat, but Ding Meng was standing there perfectly fine. Even if you're a beginner combat master, you can easily defeat a high-level war supremacy when you're seriously injured. Isn't this too illogical? Chu Yifeng was even more dumbfounded. This was the miner who worked as a laborer in the Black Gold base. 2 years ago, he was just a normal person. 2 years later, he had grown to such an extent that he could even defeat him. Even when he was seriously injured, he could still hit him until his wrist hurt. At this moment, Chu Yifeng's pride and sense of superiority were shattered by the cruel reality. All of his surprise was completely replaced by shame. He had imagined countless situations where he would encounter Ding Meng, but no matter which one it was not like this. This was not a contest of strength at all. He was still there gritting his teeth when the temperature in the hall suddenly dropped. Ding Meng's body made cracking sounds, and ice immediately wrapped around him, turning him into an ice sculpture. This was obviously Lan Bing secretly helping him. The last time she fought with Ding Meng, her dark ice power could form an ice ball with a diameter of 5 meters and directly freeze Ding Meng. After using Mr. Chu's private workroom to cultivate and improve by leaps and bounds, her dark ice power could not completely freeze Ding Meng. At this moment, Lan Bing was just as shocked as Chu Yifeng and Jiahua. Lan Bing suddenly called out, "Young Master Feng." This was to remind Chu Yifeng that he could not miss this opportunity. After all, Ding Meng was still in a half-frozen state. Chu Yifeng understood and once again took advantage of the situation. His entire body shot forward like a bolt of lightning as the Holy Radiance Flame formation transformed into a huge wall of fire that smashed towards Ding Meng. This time, he even used the Gale Flash Strike. It was truly fast and ruthless. This time, he didn't hold back at all. However, he still underestimated Ding Meng. Ding Meng was no longer the ignorant person he used to be. Although it was very difficult for him to advance with the formation, Chu Yifeng's level was not enough to threaten him. A second before Chu Yifeng used the Gale Flash Strike, the ice wall cracked. Ding Meng's body also flashed. He moved later, but arrived first. He raised his hand and cut towards Chu Yifeng's wrist before the Holy Flame formation smashed down. Chi! The red light that filled the sky suddenly disappeared, and Chu Yifeng retreated once again. He held his left wrist, and there was blood seeping out between his fingers. His left wrist was cut by the hero's knife, and he didn't even see the dark golden light of the knife. Ding Meng retreated to his original position again. It seemed that he did not move at all. To be honest, this knife was not a great knife skill. There were only a few factors: eyesight, timing, and position. It was completely a battle skill. It was a skillful move. Chu Yifeng, you sent your wrist to my knife. This was truly a helpless action. Ding Meng had no choice but to secretly activate the first 4 points after dodging those 2 points. Now, he already felt somewhat powerless, producing the same feeling of hunger and weakness that he had when he was a laborer. Chu Yifeng was furious. He was about to wave his hand again when the man in sunglasses suddenly sighed. "Forget it. You can go back." "Are you talking about me?" Chu Yifeng's tone was obviously distrustful. The man in sunglasses sighed and said, "Mr. Chu's face was completely disgraced by you. You still have the face to attack again?" Chu Yifeng's face suddenly turned red, but he could not help but roar in anger. "Why shouldn't I attack again?" The man in sunglasses said, "You should thank him. He is very weak now. The part of the knife and the strength is greatly reduced. Otherwise, that knife just now would have cut off your hand." Chu Yifeng was stunned on the spot. Although half of the man's face couldn't be seen, the bystanders could still feel the disdain on his face. "Young Master Feng, As one of the most outstanding successors of the Chu clan, you disappoint me. With your level, not only will you not be able to inherit the Haitian group's business, you won't even be able to keep the woman by your side. Once this was mentioned, Chu Yifeng could not suppress his anger at all. He said angrily, I usually respect you as Uncle Ping. You better not interfere with my business. The man in sunglasses snorted and said, Your business? Do you think I'm qualified to interfere with children's business? If Mr. Chu didn't ask me to come here this time, I wouldn't be interested in your business at all. When he said these words, Ding Ming was already fighting with 120% of his energy. However, in the next second, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in the back of his head. He did not even feel the sharp pain. His vision suddenly turned black, and then his whole body softly fell to the ground. The man in sunglasses did not seem to have moved at all. He just stood there and wiped his hand. He said coldly, I know you can't see clearly because you don't even have the strength to see clearly. Chu Yifeng stood in place, his face red. He couldn't stand this kind of humiliation, but in that moment, he really couldn't see anything. Gu Ping's attack was so fast that it was beyond his imagination. Even Ding Ming was knocked down in an instant. Gu Ping did not bother to pay attention to Chu Yifeng anymore. He turned around and walked towards the entrance. During this process, Lan Bing did not say anything. She only glanced at Ding Ming, who was lying unconscious on the ground, and her eyes became thoughtful. Finally, she turned around and said, Carry him away. Chu Yifeng and Jia Hua naturally did the hard work of carrying people. Now that Lan Bing was in charge, her words were orders. The most embarrassing thing was that he was not as skilled as others. As the young master of the Chu family, he did not expect that one day he would need to clean up the battlefield. He was so angry that he could not help but kick Ding Ming's back twice. At the entrance, Lan Bing did not even turn around. Her voice was still cold and indifferent. Young Master Feng, you better not hurt him. We need his whole body for the next research. If anything happens to him, I will not be able to answer to the old master. Chapter 347. Darkness again. Endless, eternal darkness. Only Little Rascal's voice could be heard in the darkness. Xiao AI, are you back to normal? No one answered, so Little Rascal could only continue to remain silent. Ding Ming was still in a severe coma. The origin had stopped operating and was now dim and lifeless. Only an extremely weak amount of origin energy was still circulating in his body. Gu Ping's sudden attack had been too fast and too fierce. He had elbowed Ding Ming in the back of his head, instantly knocking him out. He was still unconscious even now. Ding Ming had been severely injured, and Little Rascal's functions and operations were affected as well. Xiao AI seemed to have entered a dormant state, but strangely enough, Little Rascal was still very active. It didn't seem to be affected too much, but it could only use the event recorder. All other functions, such as searching, probing, and analyzing, were all disabled. After an indeterminate amount of time, a sliver of light finally appeared in the darkness. This sliver of light slowly expanded, illuminating the entire world as bright as day. It turned out that this was a space similar to a hospital room. The entire room was spotlessly white. Aside from the necessary control panel, there were all kinds of medical equipment such as pods, drill needles, and high-precision robotic arms. However, those with discerning eyes could tell that these weren't medical equipment, but surgical equipment. Ding Ming was currently lying on an operating table. His limbs had been secured to the edge of the bed by his supergravity alloy energy bands. With a whooshing sound, the alloy door hidden in the wall automatically opened to both sides. Two doctors in white coats walked in, and behind them was naturally Lan Bing, who had a calm expression on her face. Lan Bing glanced at the unconscious Ding Ming on the operating table. She turned her head and asked, Is there still no way? One of the doctors, a middle-aged man with a rough face, shook his head helplessly. This person's body is extremely tough. Normal surgical guns can't even cut through his skin. He's an origin energy user, Lan Bing explained. The middle-aged doctor nodded. I know that, but he's different from the average origin ability user. His basic origin ability energy is especially strong. If we use a special condensed energy needle, I'm afraid it will hurt his organs. If that's the case, I'm afraid the follow-up research will be much more difficult. Have you done a blood test? Lan Bing asked. Yes. The middle-aged doctor frowned and said, we didn't find any difference in his blood. Lan Bing asked, have you tried medicine before? The young assistant next to the middle-aged doctor hurriedly explained, we've tried many kinds of drugs. We found that this person is almost immune to all kinds of enhancement and non-enhancement drug reagents. Even our strongest super crystal energy fusion source modification agent did not change at all after we forced it on him orally. Also, although he is in a deep sleep, this is not caused by neurotoxins. We found that neurotoxins have no effect on him at all. Are you saying that he's immune to all poisons? Lan Bing asked. The middle-aged doctor nodded. In theory, that is indeed the case. When we removed his equipment and cleaned his body, we found that his body was contaminated with a lot of world-devouring poison. The amount of poison was 40 times more than the one in the basement, but he was still unaffected. Lan Bing fell silent. After a long while, she asked, have you checked with the medical cabin? The middle-aged doctor replied, yes, we did. We used the most advanced medical cabin of the Federation's Angel 7th generation, but we still discovered a strange phenomenon. Lan Bing's eyes finally lit up. What phenomenon? The middle-aged doctor immediately extended his hand respectfully. Miss Bing, this way please. The screen on the control panel had already risen. The image displayed was an image of a human body. This image was Ding Meng's body. It was a two-dimensional composite. This situation was exactly the same as when Ding Meng had used Vader's medical cabin for the first time in the Black Gold base. The body was like a piece of paper that could be seen through. On the screen, there were 7 faintly glowing dots where Ding Meng's heart was located. There were also 2 dots on his head. One of the dots was the same as the one in his heart, but the other dot was colorful. The assistant had already begun to explain. Under the examination of the crystal energy microscope, the system determined that there's an 85% chance that these 8 normal dots are the origin of this person's origin energy support. Even though Lan Bing was usually calm and collected, she was still shocked, speechless by the concept image in front of her. She knew very well how terrifying Ding Meng was. Ding Meng's strength lay in the fact that his strength had increased exponentially in a short period of time. Lan Bing had always imagined many things about Ding Meng. In her mind, Ding Meng's beginner combat master cultivation technique should be of a very high level, but she had never expected that Ding Meng's cultivation technique would actually be an 8-star basic cultivation technique. There was no other reason. Lan Bing was not stupid enough to believe that Ding Meng had cultivated other cultivation techniques aside from the basic cultivation technique. Even if Ding Meng had a 7-star cultivation technique, the dots in his brain would still be a new cultivation technique. Most likely, this was only the first that had been constructed. Just a basic cultivation technique was enough to allow Ding Meng to display such incredible strength. More importantly, Ding Meng was just too young. A 22-year-old beginner combat master. A chill ran from Lan Bing's feet to her head. What she saw in front of her was not Ding Meng, but the future. A terrifying future. If someone like Ding Meng was allowed to live, the Haitian group would have no future to speak of. For a moment, the room was filled with an indescribable chill. The middle-aged doctor and his assistant both felt extremely cold. This was not a coldness that came from their bodies, but from the depths of their hearts. Little did they know that Lan Bing had already decided to kill them, and her killing intent had already spread throughout the room. However, this chill quickly disappeared. Lan Bing pointed at the image and said, "What's up with that 5-colored?" The middle-aged doctor replied in a trembling voice, "I'm sorry, Miss Bing. We don't know." Lan Bing's expression changed. "You don't know?" The assistant also lowered his head, and his voice trembled. I'm sorry. We really don't know. This it's beyond our understanding. We don't know what it is." A hint of anger flashed across Lan Bing's face. Say that again? The middle-aged doctor also stuttered. Miss Bing, I'm really sorry. The system can't detect it. It says that it's an unknown symptom. If the two of them had seen the scene of Vader treating Ding Meng, they would have known that this was the unique point of convergence that Ding Meng had seen back then. Little Rascal was relying on this point to communicate with Ding Meng through telepathy. However, this point of convergence had already evolved into a 5-color dot. Furthermore, the instrument would not lie. The crystal energy microscope clearly showed that this 5-color dot was much larger than the original point. However, in the next moment, Lan Bing flew into a rage. Ridiculous! As the most outstanding medical experts and biological authorities of the Haitian group, you have the nerve to say something like this? Mr. Chu spends a huge sum of money on research every quarter just to hear you say that you don't know? The assistant didn't dare to answer at all. The middle-aged doctor mustered up his courage and said, Miss Bing, although we don't know, Mr. Gate definitely knows. Mr. Gouet is on his way here. Lan Bing said expressionlessly. Now, the two of you get out of here. Don't appear in front of me again. The two of them felt as if they had been pardoned. They turned around and walked out, afraid that they would provoke Lan Bing again if they were too slow. After the two of them left, Lan Bing's gaze returned to Ding Meng. If she had paid special attention to Ding Meng before, she now felt a trace of respect for him. Although the person in front of her was still unconscious, she felt that he was a slumbering, sharp blade. Once he woke up, he would naturally regain his sharpness. Once he was unsheathed, he would draw blood and kill. She was still deep in thought when there was another muffled sound. Chu Yifeng's figure appeared at the door. At this time, Chu Yifeng had already lost his steady, calm, and elegant image. His eyes were red, and the muscles on his face were trembling. He was clearly in a negative mood. However, he was still able to control himself. He slowly walked in and said in a gloomy voice, I just went to Uncle Ping's place. This was the first time Lan Bing didn't face Chu Yifeng directly. Her gaze was still on the screen, as if the various images on the screen were more important than Chu Yifeng. I know what you want to ask, Lan Bing said calmly. Chu Yifeng's pupils contracted. Are you sure you know? Lan Bing was silent. Then she sighed. Sometimes, I know you better than I know myself. Hearing this answer, Chu Yifeng seemed to sigh in relief. Binger, you should understand my feelings for you. Of course I understand. Lan Bing turned around. Her tone was still calm, as if she was explaining a trivial matter. Young Master Feng, you've treated me well all these years. You've changed me from an ordinary person to an origin ability user. I can feel the blood, sweat, and effort you've put in. Chu Yifeng was relieved. It's good that you understand. Lan Bing continued. As a man, especially as the successor of Haitian Group, you've made choices, sacrifices, and forbearances for me. I also believe that you have true feelings for me. You don't have any other intentions. She had always been a woman of few words. She rarely spoke so much, and she was so straightforward. However, her straightforwardness made Chu Yifeng feel a little uneasy. Sure enough, Lan Bing's tone changed again. It became just as gloomy. Unfortunately, young Master Feng, you've forgotten something. What is it? Chu Yifeng was a little nervous. Lan Bing stared at him. A cold light flashed in her eyes. You forgot to ask me if I want to be this kind of person. Don't want to do these things? Don't want to live this kind of life? Chu Yifeng was stunned. The Lan Bing in front of him felt like a stranger. At this time, Lan Bing finally said something shocking. That's right. Uncle Ping didn't lie to you. I've already promised Mr. Chu. Chu Yifeng felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head. He shouted sternly, Nonsense! Nonsense! You're talking nonsense. Chapter 348. Lan Bing looked at him calmly. I'm not talking nonsense. You just found out now. Chu Yifeng's eyes turned red. He screamed, Why? Why are you doing this? Lan Bing turned around and looked at the screen. Do you see these images? Chu Yifeng was stunned again. What do you mean? Lan Bing explained calmly. Even the most talented people in our corporation can't figure out the secrets of this person. Do you think he's too strong or we're too weak? 2 years ago, this person was just a laborer, an inferior race that was exiled. You can't even deal with a laborer. Do you think Mr. Chu will trust you enough to take over the corporation? Chu Yifeng was speechless. He thought of himself as God's favored son, the most promising successor of the corporation, but he couldn't even beat a laborer in his own territory. In the fight just now, he couldn't even touch Ding Meng's clothes. Yes, if he was Chu Mingliang, he wouldn't have handed over the Chu family's business to someone like him. That would be destroying his own foundation. However, Chu Yifeng was still unconvinced. He roared, "But that's not a reason for you to follow this old man." Lan Bing looked at him with contempt. "Since I agreed to be Mr. Chu's woman, I don't have a status. However, after I become Mr. Chu's assistant, I will naturally help him manage all of his businesses, shoulder the mission of revitalizing the corporation, and help him choose a suitable successor. I'm doing this for the big picture, bitch." Chu Yifeng suddenly slapped her. He didn't use any origin energy, and Lan Bing didn't dodge. She allowed the slap to land on her face, and a fiery handprint appeared on her beautiful face. Her hair, which had been tied up in a bun, fell down. However, Lan Bing still looked very calm despite her disheveled hair. She was so calm that it sent chills down one's spine. She wiped the corner of her mouth with her finger. She smelled a faint salty taste, and her expression became even more contemptuous. Uncle Ping is right. You can't even protect your own woman, and when you can't protect her, you hit your own woman. Not only have you failed, but you're also disappointing. Chu Yifeng was furious. He kicked Lan Bing to the ground. "Bitch, you're mine. No one is allowed to take you away from me." Then, he grabbed Lan Bing's collar and lifted her up. "Look, I'm your man. I'm not anyone else, especially not that old man." Lan Bing couldn't be bothered with him. Her face was still as cold as ever. Usually, when Chu Yifeng saw Lan Bing's cold and elegant demeanor, he always felt that it was a kind of inviolable beauty. But now, seeing this kind of expression, the anger in his heart was enough to destroy everything. At this moment, his anger won over his rationality. He tore off Lan Bing's suit jacket, then tore off her sleeves with a ripping sound, exposing her white arms to the air. Chu Yifeng clenched her arm and released his origin energy. A red dot immediately appeared in the center of Lan Bing's flawless arm. It was as red as cinnabar. Chu Yifeng suddenly laughed crazily. "Very good. You said you wanted to become this old man's woman. Unfortunately, you're not yet. I won't give him this chance." Lan Bing's expression finally changed. "What are you trying to do?" "What am I trying to do?" Chu Yifeng replied fiercely as he took off his jacket. "I want you to become my woman now." Then, he pressed down hard on Lan Bing's shoulder. With a tug of his fingers, half of her snow-white blouse was torn apart, exposing a large patch of skin. Greed immediately appeared in Chu Yifeng's eyes. He had been drooling over this body for far too long. In the past, he had always fantasized about the two of them being in love. But this time, he couldn't wait any longer. The situation didn't allow him to wait any longer. Whether she was the old man's woman or he was the one who forced himself on her, he had to have her first. He would never allow anyone else to touch his things. Lan Bing stood there without moving, allowing Chu Yifeng to tear her body apart. However, there was a trace of sadness in her cold eyes. She seemed to have known that this day would come sooner or later. She had been mentally prepared for it. However, at this moment, a thunderous voice came from the door. "Enough." Chu Yifeng suddenly woke up. He looked back and found that Gu Ping was already in front of him. Before he could react, Gu Ping slapped him and sent him flying. He bounced against the wall and fell down, smashing a pile of instruments into pieces. Chu Yifeng on the ground looked at Gu Ping in surprise. "Uncle Ping, you—" Gu Ping interrupted him sternly. "Bastard, do you know what you are doing?" Chu Yifeng shouted hoarsely. "Binger was originally my woman." Gu Ping snorted coldly. "She might have been the past, but now she is no longer. After a while, you should call her grandaunt. How dare you mess with her? Do you really think the rules of the Chu family don't exist?" The three words "Grand Aunt" were like a sudden clap of thunder in Chu Yifeng's head. If he really did something to Lan Bing, once the news spread, it would be a huge scandal. It was hard to say whether Lan Bing would be fine or not, but Chu Yifeng, would definitely be expelled from the Chu family. Furthermore, he would be cut into 8 pieces and fed to the dogs by Chu Mingliang. Chu Yifeng was still in shock, but Gu Ping slightly bowed his head to Lan Bing. Lan Bing put on her coat and replied indifferently, "I'm fine. Thank you, Uncle Ping." Gu Ping turned his head and glared at Chu Yifeng. "You come out with me." Chu Yifeng angrily climbed up from the ground. No matter how lawless he was, he didn't dare to be rash in front of Gu Ping. This was a loyal follower who had followed the old man for 200 years. He was a founding member of the Chu family who had fought with the old man until now. Sometimes his words were equivalent to the old man's words. However, Chu Yifeng wasn't willing to give up. When he walked out the door, he turned his head and glared at Lan Bing fiercely. His eyes were no doubt warning her, "Don't think you can escape from my hands. I will be back later." Lan Bing didn't care. She just gently tidied up her clothes and slightly operated her origin energy. The 5 fingerprints on her face quickly faded. With a woo-woo sound, the alloy door closed again. Lan Bing turned around and was surprised to find that Ding Meng had opened his eyes at some point. Ding Meng was also very calm. He was already aware of what had just happened, and he also knew that he was in a very bad situation. All of the origin points in his body were on the verge of being extinguished. Only a feeble wisp of origin energy was circulating in his body, protecting his body. His blood circulation was extremely slow, and his internal organs were extremely cold, as if they had all been frozen. Ding Meng had experienced this feeling before. When he had fought against Sun Shiling during the exam, Sun Shiling's winter ice dust storm had injected him with origin energy molecules that had extremely strong penetrative properties. These origin energy molecules were known as origin bodies. They could seal off the circulation of blood and slow down the recovery of origin energy. It was as if all of the origin energy molecules had been locked. If you wanted to unlock them, you had to slowly use your origin energy to melt them down. Right now, Ding Meng's origin energy had almost completely blocked off all of the capillaries in his body. It was obvious that Lan Bing had injected it into him while he was unconscious. Based on what he could sense, Lan Bing's strength was actually about the same as his own. Furthermore, his hands and feet were still bound by the origin energy cuffs. Ding Meng wasn't confident in being able to break free. He could only use his consciousness to summon Little Rascal. "How much time do I have left?" Little Rascal sighed. "Ding Meng, based on your current origin energy, you will need 12 hours to awaken Xiao AI, 96 hours to melt down 13 origin bodies, and 142 hours to completely melt them down. After that, you will need 3 hours to reconstruct the first 5 origin bodies, and 8 hours to absorb origin energy." Ding Meng didn't say anything. He understood why Little Rascal had sighed. These numbers told him that if he wanted to return to normal, he would need at least half a month or a month. Moreover, these were just the conditions for time. He hadn't even factored in the fact that he would need to absorb the inverse origin crystal's origin energy and refine the origin energy. His actual recovery would probably take even longer. This time, he was the meat on the chopping block in the truest sense of the word. This time, it was different from the dangerous situations and life-threatening situations he had faced in the past. This wasn't because the enemy was too powerful, but because his combat strength had been depleted. Ding Meng suddenly calmed down. He knew that he couldn't be anxious at a time like this. He had to patiently wait for the right opportunity. He believed that the heavens would always leave a way out. Since the heavens had blocked this path, they would definitely open another window for him. Lan Bing suddenly said, "You're still the same as before. You haven't changed much." Ding Meng frowned. He didn't understand this, but he quickly understood because Lan Bing continued, "However, you've changed a lot as well. So much so that we had no choice but to resort to extreme measures." Ding Meng's calmness and cautiousness hadn't changed. The biggest change was in the strength he had cultivated in a short period of time. Ding Ming suddenly sighed. I finally figured out one thing. Lan Bing stared at him. What is it? Ding Ming said. So the person who really wanted the K-virus wasn't you or Chu Yifeng, but Chu Mingliang. Lan Bing was silent. She seemed to be thinking about something. But the person who really got the K-virus was you. Ding Ming said, You're wrong. I didn't get it either. Lan Bing was stunned. You didn't get it? Ding Ming nodded. The K-virus fused with me. I didn't get it, but it chose me. Lan Bing looked surprised. You mean you're the carrier of the K-virus? Or you're the carrier chosen by the K-virus? Ding Ming said, Yes. Lan Bing looked at him and nodded solemnly. I believe you. This time, it was Ding Ming's turn to be stunned. Oh, I stole the K-virus, killed Baines, killed your war reverend, and went against all of you. You still believe me? Lan Bing nodded. That's right. It's because you're my enemy that I trust you. Ding Ming found it hard to understand. Fortunately, Lan Bing took the initiative to explain. Sometimes, the person who truly trusts you is your enemy. Because only your enemy will value you, study you, and believe in you. Otherwise, you'll die in his hands. This was a very profound thought. Ding Ming seemed to understand something. He stared at her and said, And sometimes, the person who betrays you is your friend? Correct. Lan Bing walked to the control panel and turned off the screen. There's another reason why I trust you. Ding Ming said, What's the reason? Lan Bing's lips curled into an almost imperceptible sneer. You're racing against time to repair yourself. If you want to delay me and buy precious time, you have to give me something to move me. You're a smart person. You know that lying won't make me stay. So, I absolutely believe that you're telling the truth. Chapter 349. The lights in the operating room were extremely bright, but Ding Ming felt an inexplicable chill. He had fought Lan Bing several times, both directly and indirectly. He felt that he had underestimated this woman. Sometimes, women had a primitive advantage, and that was to make their male opponents underestimate them. This was because under normal circumstances, men would have a prideful attitude. She was just a woman. No matter how powerful she was, there was still a limit. Ding Ming was silent. He said, Is there any other reason? Lan Bing glanced at him and said, If there is another reason, it would be old you. Old you? Ding Ming was stunned. He suddenly remembered the days when he lived in Qingxi Farm on the border planet of TT-12 in the Norse Empire. The kind and hardworking villager, Old You, worked hard day after day, year after year. Ding Ming was taken in by Old You after he escaped from Black Gold Base. Lan Bing was also sent to Old You when she pretended to be Lan Xiao. What does this have to do with Old You? Ding Ming couldn't help but ask. Lan Bing's gaze fell on the crystal board on the wall, but she seemed to be reminiscing about the past. After a long time, she sighed softly. I was raised in a poor family. Ding Ming stared at her. I believe you. Lan Bing laughed coldly. But back then, you thought that I was the kind of person who didn't know how to work? Ding Ming muttered. I just realized that I was wrong. Lan Bing frowned. Just now? Ding Ming nodded slightly. Yes, just now. When Chu Yifeng tore your clothes, I saw a large patch of calluses on your back. If I'm not wrong, it was caused by carrying heavy objects for a long time when you were young. Although you're a biochemist and can repair your scars, you didn't choose to do so. Instead, you let these scars remain on your body. I believe that you must have your reasons. Lan Bing suddenly turned around, as if she didn't want Ding Ming to see her current expression. After a long time, Lan Bing finally turned around and said indifferently, From planet TT-12 to Black Gold Base, Flying Star City, and Bogger Planet, I actually had many opportunities to kill you directly or indirectly. Ding Ming nodded. Yes, Lan Bing said, but I need you alive. Ding Ming said, because of the cave virus? Lan Bing said, it's not entirely because of the cave virus. Ding Ming asked, then why are you doing this? Lan Bing said, because I only have hope if you're alive. Ding Ming was even more confused. What hope do you have? You will know. Lan Bing felt like she had said too much today, so she simply turned around and said, I want you to have a good rest and recover your energy. Ding Ming sneered. And then provide them to you for research? As long as you understand. Lan Bing replied as she walked towards the alloy door. Following her departure, the light panels in the room began to extinguish one by one, and the entire world returned to darkness. Within the darkness, Ding Ming did his best to activate that sliver of origin energy, but it was to no avail. The amount of origin energy that Lan Bing had injected into his origin core was simply too great. His sliver of origin energy was like a river trying to fight against a large lake. With his origin energy not flowing smoothly, the other things that were affected were his telekinesis and Little Rascal's various functions. Ding Ming felt a bit helpless. Is there really no other way? Little Rascal said. There really isn't any other way. I just checked, and the origin energy floating in this room is very thin. I don't even know where this place is. Ding Ming sighed. I keep feeling like there's something wrong with this whole situation. Little Rascal said, What's wrong? Ding Ming said, I know that Chu Yifeng's group has been scheming to deal with me this entire time, but this is just too much of a coincidence. Little Rascal quickly reacted. That's right. Even we can't figure out where we're going, but Lan Bing and the others were able to find us so quickly. Moreover, she should know that we've fought with that Quan Jinwei before. How could she know so clearly? Is it because of that Gu Ping? Ding Ming nodded. That's very likely. That guy's strength is truly terrifying. Little Rascal said, He knocked you out as soon as he made his move. Excluding the fact that we're injured, according to my calculations, he shouldn't be any weaker than a high-level champion. Ding Ming fell silent. Little Rascal naturally knew what he was thinking. With Gu Ping's strength, even if he was equipped with an undamaged prototype under normal circumstances, Ding Ming still wouldn't have a chance of victory. As such, the chances of them escaping this place were infinitely close to zero. Since the normal path wouldn't work, they had to think of another way. Ding Ming said, How much time has passed? Little Rascal sighed. It's been 145 hours, 23 minutes, and 50 seconds since we landed on a mortal Weaver planet and came all the way here. After such a long time, there might still be one last hope. I hope that Fan Chengying has already contacted the military with your wristband, and reinforcements from the military will be here soon. After all, it's been almost a week since you lost contact with them. Let's hope so. Ding Ming closed his eyes. The most important thing now was to buy time to heal himself. 3 hours later, the alloy door on the wall cracked open again with a creak. Ding Ming opened his eyes and found that the intruder hadn't turned on the lighting system. Instead, the room was still in darkness. Not turning on the light source probably meant that they were here to do something shady. Ding Ming was a little nervous, but he forced himself to calm down. The person in the darkness hadn't arrived yet, but a gentle fragrance wafted over. This wasn't the smell of perfume or makeup, but rather the unique scent of a woman. Even without seeing the person, just the smell alone was enough to make one intoxicated. This scent was also mixed with the pressure of origin energy. Ding Ming couldn't circulate the same amount of origin energy at the moment, so it was naturally very difficult for him to resist this fragrance. In truth, during the time he had spent with Dai Yi in Blue Pole Star City, he had already gotten used to the scent of women. For example, Dai Yi, Aaron, and Su Qianqian all liked to wear particularly strong perfume. It was precisely the kind of perfume that could cause a gust of wind when they walked that deeply attracted others. However, this scent was a faint fragrance. At first, it felt like the fragrance of oranges and flowers, but after a careful sniff, it actually carried a fresh and natural sweetness. It was only when the person got closer that he could feel the refreshing fragrance. There was no doubt that the intruder was a woman, but this woman seemed to be wearing a loose robe that completely covered her body. What surprised Ding Ming the most was that as soon as the woman walked up to the operating table, she reached out and fiddled with the edge of the bed a few times. The 4 bracelet-shaped supergravity alloy energy bracelets actually popped open on their own. At this moment, Ding Ming almost cried out in surprise. Who would have thought that as soon as he sat up, the intruder would unceremoniously push him back down? Ding Meng's heart sank. The person who had come wasn't Meng Yan. According to his calculations, if there was really someone who could reach this place, that person would undoubtedly be Meng Yan. Meng Yan's ability to disguise herself and infiltrate the enemy's rear was unquestionable. Ding Meng was also full of confidence in her in this aspect. However, when the woman in front of him pushed him, a bone-chilling cold energy immediately poured into his body. With how weak Ding Meng was right now, even if the energy bracelets were removed, he still wouldn't be able to resist. "So it's you." Ding Meng was completely shocked. The intruder didn't allow him to speak at all. She immediately used something to seal his mouth. In just an instant, Ding Meng felt a very unsightly change in some parts of his body. He couldn't control it at all because it was instinctive. Following that, a sharp wave of ice-type origin energy poured into his body. Ding Meng's origin energy was tightly locked down by this person's origin energy. He couldn't move, nor could he resist. He could only grit his teeth and bear with it. For him, this was both a painful pressure and a novel pleasure. He felt his lips gradually becoming dry and cracked, and his entire body was drenched in sweat. Little Rascal quietly turned off the event recorder and automatically entered hibernation mode. After a long time, the waves passed, and the passion returned to normal. The two of them lay side by side on the operating table, panting. Never in Ding Meng's wildest dreams did she expect the person lying beside her to be Lan Bing. The process just now had happened far too quickly. It was so quick that it caught him off guard, and it was so quick that it was impossible to guard against it. Everything was like a dream, both sweet and absurd. It was so absurd that it was frightening. If it weren't for Lan Bing's gorgeous face right in front of him and the sweet scent of her breath, Ding Meng really would have thought that it was all a dream. Everything had disappeared without a trace. Right now, the atmosphere in the room wasn't subtle, but rather strange. Lan Bing was the first to speak. "You must think that I'm crazy, right?" Ding Meng smiled bitterly. "I do think so," Lan Bing said. "Do you still think that I've fallen for you?" Ding Meng's smile became even more bitter. "I still have some self-awareness. I've never had such thoughts before." "Very good." Lan Bing suddenly sat up. As she sat up, she had already changed into the woman's suit. At this moment, Ding Meng realized that half of his ice origin body had been retracted. Even so, his body was still very weak. After all, his origin body hadn't recovered yet. "You better lie down and don't move." Lan Bing's voice was cold again. However, there was a trace of emotion in this coldness. Others might not be able to detect it, but Ding Meng could. The relationship between a man and a woman was very strange at times. After what had just happened, Ding Meng felt that he had formed a strange connection with this woman. As for what kind of connection it was, he couldn't say, but he could feel it. Lan Bing seemed to know what he was thinking. She said coldly, "Are you thinking about what just happened?" Ding Meng's face heated up. Fortunately, the room was dark, so they couldn't see each other's expressions. However, Lan Bing's tone turned cold. "Don't worry, there won't be a second time." Chapter 350. Ding Meng didn't ask why. His earlier confusion had turned into horror. He could sense that something bad was going to happen from Lan Bing's tone. Lan Bing stood up and snapped her fingers. The light panels around her lit up again, and the room was illuminated once more. Lan Bing's hair was a little messy. It was draped over her shoulders, and the blush on her face hadn't completely faded. She looked like a ripe apple, and it was very tempting. If she didn't look like this, Ding Meng would have thought that he was dreaming. Unfortunately, Lan Bing's face was expressionless. She looked down at Ding Meng and said, "Do you know why I chose you?" Ding Meng thought for a while and said, "You must have your reasons." Lan Bing gritted her teeth and said, "Because you are the only person in this place who is still human. At the very least, you dare to put yourself in danger for the sake of the tens of thousands of refugees on planet KV-303. You deserve to be a human. I would rather let a human enjoy myself than let an animal taint me." Ding Meng sighed and said, "I'm not enjoying myself. Besides, this experience isn't pleasant." Lan Bing looked directly at him and said in a much gentler tone, "But you are a human." Ding Ming was silent for a long time before he said, "I understand." Lan Bing stared at him and said, "Do you really understand?" Ding Ming didn't answer because he couldn't bear to say it out loud. He could understand Lan Bing. She didn't want to be Chu Mingliang's woman, and she definitely wouldn't let Chu Yifeng defile her. She would rather destroy her chastity and happiness than agree to the Chu family's request. Ding Ming suddenly realized that Lan Bing had an ulterior motive. She was definitely not the real brains of Haitian group. Ding Ming raised his head and stared at her. "Who are you?" Lan Bing's expression immediately turned vicious. "Do you remember your cousin Yuman from the Listen Academy? I've always been an ordinary woman, until Chu Yifeng started pestering me. My foster parents and siblings were all killed by him. He even hid it from me and pretended to pursue me, saying that he wanted to make me the happiest woman in the Federation. If it wasn't for the arrival of this day, I wouldn't have endured for so many years." Ding Ming finally understood. Lan Bing's noble and cold demeanor was all a facade. She stayed by her enemy's side to wait for an opportunity to take revenge. This Lan Bing with a face full of resentment was the real Lan Bing. Ding Ming understood the horror of hatred because he also shouldered the same mission. He suddenly realized that he and Lan Bing were the same kind of people to some extent. However, he was definitely not as extreme as her. At least, Ding Ming would not be so cruel to himself. Ding Ming was still deep in thought when Lan Bing smiled. She rarely smiled, and her smile was the kind that was unforgettable. However, looking at it now made Ding Ming feel a deep chill. "Did you already plan for this?" Lan Bing did not answer his question directly. Instead, she silently counted down. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. When she counted to 1, the alloy door automatically opened with a whoosh and a figure stumbled in. Ding Ming frowned. He smelled a pungent smell of alcohol. Chu Yifeng was so drunk that he could not even walk properly. Jia Hua hurried over to support him. Young Master Feng, slow down." Chu Yifeng's hazy eyes lit up the moment he saw Lan Bing. "Binger, you're here. I knew you'd wait for me, didn't you?" Lan Bing had already returned to her usual indifferent attitude. "Young Master Feng, you're drunk. It's good to be drunk. It's good to be drunk. I want to sleep. I want to sleep." Chu Yifeng did not have the slightest bit of gentlemanly demeanor. He came up and hugged Lan Bing's slender waist domineeringly. He said softly, "Can you accompany me?" Lan Bing replied coldly, "I've said a long time ago. I belong to you. If young Master Feng wants me, you can do it anytime, anywhere." If Chu Yifeng heard this when he was sober in the past, he would definitely back off gracefully. He knew that a forcibly picked melon would not be sweet. However, this was a special time. He completely ignored Ding Ming, who had just woken up. He did not care that Jia Hua was behind him. He even reached out to unbutton Lan Bing's shirt. Lan Bing stood still and let him do it. Jia Hua could not stand it anymore. He came here because Gu Ping told him to watch Chu Yifeng closely. Do not let him mess around. But Jia Hua never thought that Chu Yifeng would not only dare to mess around, but also do it in broad daylight in front of other people. He hurried over to support Chu Yifeng. Young Master Feng, you drank too much. Let's go back and rest." Chu Yifeng waved his hand and shook him off. "Who do you think you are? How dare you meddle in my business?" Jia Hua was not angry. He continued to support him. "Young Master Feng, this is an operation room. Don't be like this. Let's go. If you want to drink, I can drink with you today." Chu Yifeng showed a wretched smile. "This is the effect I want." This time, Jia Hua could not let him mess around anymore. He hugged him from behind. Young Master Feng, calm down. Miss Lan Bing's identity is different now. You must calm down." Chu Yifeng was angry. He threw Jia Hua to the ground. He was furious. "Calm down, my ass. I have played with more women than you have walked on the bridge. Get out of my way." Jia Hua was stunned. He knew that Chu Yifeng had always been a person with great self-control. He rarely drank. He did not expect that Chu Yifeng would become a completely different person after getting drunk. Chu Yifeng was really crazy. Chu Yifeng dared to be rough with Jia Hua, but Jia Hua did not dare to be rude to Chu Yifeng. He could only shout, "Young Master Feng, you can't touch her. She is your elder. This is against etiquette." And Uncle Ping said that you will not be allowed to do it a second time. Otherwise, you will be treated as an enemy of Hai Tian. This sentence was effective. Chu Yifeng's footsteps really did stop. His face revealed a complicated expression of pain and hesitation. In fact, he also knew that if he attacked again, the consequences would be beyond redemption. Who knew that Lan Bing would spit out a word coldly? "Come." Chu Yifeng was stunned. Jiahua was stunned. Even Ding Meng was surprised. Lan Bing looked at Chu Yifeng with contempt. She said sternly, "You don't even dare to touch your own woman. Are you still a man? Coward! Come here. Don't make me look down on you." These words made Chu Yifeng angry. He gritted his teeth and said, "Okay, you asked for it." With that, Chu Yifeng strode forward. He hugged Lan Bing and bit her neck. Just at this moment, a cold light shot towards Chu Yifeng's back like an arrow leaving the bow. This was the most unexpected opportunity and also the best opportunity. It was very likely that this kind of opportunity would only come once. In Ding Meng's eyes, Chu Yifeng had to die. But in the next moment, Chu Yifeng's back seemed to have eyes. He turned around and caught the cold light with 2 fingers. When she looked up again, he didn't look drunk at all. There was a trace of coldness on his face. "Do you really think I'm drunk?" Jiahua was shocked. He immediately let go and retreated. He retreated slowly, but the other party was faster. Chu Yifeng took advantage of the situation and waved his hand. This incomparably sharp military knife flew back in the same way it had flown here. Jiahua immediately let out an extremely terrified scream. The military spike pierced through his shoulder blade, and he was nailed to the crystal wall with the spike. This change was really unexpected. Everyone thought that Chu Yifeng was dead for sure. Who knew that he had been watching behind him all this time? "You think I don't know what you're thinking?" Chu Yifeng showed a proud expression. "I knew you had a problem when you secretly asked Jia Mao to hire the pirates to kill planet KV-303. Jiahua was sweating. He pulled out the military knife and sat on the ground. "What problem can I have?" Chu Yifeng sneered. "Massacring civilians, colluding with pirates, to be able to make you do such a heinous thing. It's impossible that someone instigated you to do it. It's just your own wishful thinking." Jiahua stared at Chu Yifeng in horror. He was indeed deeply poisoned. This poison was none other than Lan Bing's poison. From the first time he saw Lan Bing on Sea Heaven's Pole Island, he couldn't stop himself. He was completely infatuated with this woman. Even if he closed his eyes, he would see Lan Bing's face. Even in his dreams, he couldn't get rid of Lan Bing's figure. He also knew that this was Chu Yifeng's forbidden area. He wouldn't allow others to think about it, but he just couldn't control himself. It should be said that the more you controlled your emotions, the more it would brew. The more it brewed, the more it would accumulate. The more it accumulated, the more it would explode. Once it exploded, the consequences would be terrible. Jiahua also knew that he couldn't escape this time. He couldn't help but say angrily, "My wishful thinking? You're the one who's wishful thinking. You think you love her, but you just treat her as your plaything, like a bird in a cage. Have you ever thought about what she needs? Has she ever been happy?" "Shut up," Chu Yifeng shouted harshly. "My father's generation and your father's generation are all brothers, and I usually treat you as my own brother. I didn't expect you to dare to have ideas about my woman and even dare to betray me." Jiahua was also angry. "Betray you? What right do you have to say that I betrayed you? Is it wrong for me to like someone?" Chu Yifeng said angrily. "But there are some people you can't like." Jiahua roared. "What kind of bullshit logic is this? Who I like is my business. I like her. So what? I'm willing to do anything for her. No one can stop me." Chu Yifeng took 2 steps forward. His eyes were fierce. "Since you're so stubborn, then I'll break this thought of yours." After speaking, he secretly used origin energy. He raised his hand and a red light quickly gathered in his palm. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.